We'll move on to the agenda straight away. Apologies for absence, anyone?
Chair, Councillors Thomas are not here yet, but all other members are present, so I suggest we continue. We think they may not attend.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Declarations of interest, anyone? Councillor Sands?
On the item regarding the McDonald's on Mousehold, I have to declare that I am chair of Mousehold Conservators, but that doesn't influence my decision in any way, but I thought it should be noted.
Councillor Young?
Chair, that will be minuted.
Yeah.
UEA is my employer, so anything related to UEA.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
item 5. Councillor Young won't take part in that. I know it's a decision to have an extra meeting, and that's.
Councillor Bergline?
My children go to a school which is attached to the same trust as the school that we'll be talking about, but that's a non-community.
Councillor Lovett?
That's another interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Items 4C and 4D. 4C, I objected to the application and asked for it to be called in, and I will declare my predetermination that I do not intend to speak. I'm satisfied that it's going to be considered by the planning committee. And 4D, again, I objected and called the application in, and I will speak on that issue and then take no part in the decision.
Okay, thank you.
In those two cases, Councillor Lubbock will leave for 4C, I suggest that you leave the meeting for that whole item. For 4D, you may speak as a member of the public, so you can attend the meeting until this, so you sit down in the public gallery, speak as a member of the public, and then leave the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, any other one? Councillor Peake?
It's not a declaration of interest, but I couldn't make the site visit on Friday, but I did drive up there on my day
What
off.
site visit?
We didn't have a site visit.
I thought it was, and that's about that area.
No.
The itinerant was from members of Mousehold Heath Conservators. It was nothing to do with the Planning Applications Committee.
I thought I missed something there.
Yeah. There's been no
Okay, no problem, thank you. Minutes of last meeting.
Record that, as it's nothing.
Minutes of last meeting, do we agree there? Quick record for people who are here?
Yep.
Thank you. Right, move on to the planning applications. The first one is the land at Mousehold Heath, which is on page 11 to 44, and our planning officer Maria will take us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this planning application is for land at Mousehold Lane, and it proposes the erection of a freestanding restaurant with drive-through facility, car parking, landscaping and associated works, including customer order displays and a play frame. The application site outlined in red here covers 0.49 hectares in area. It's located on the southern side of Mousehold Lane, which forms part of the Outer Ring Road. This is a busy 40-mile-an-hour section of this principal route along this area. Within the application site, it's currently occupied by a used car retailer, and it includes 3 existing buildings, 1 on the eastern boundary and 2 to the south. Otherwise, it's predominantly laid to hard surfacing. This is a largely residential area with a suburban character. Along Playford Road to the west of the site, dwellings here have gardens which back on to the boundary of the site. There are also dwellings across Mousehold Lane to the north, many of which have views across the road towards the application site. On the corner of Corbett Avenue, just here, there's a garden centre. Immediately east of the site, there's a petrol filling station with a shop. That's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And further to the south, there's a garage which borders the site. The southern boundary of the site itself backs on to Mousehold Heath, which is a county wildlife site and local nature reserve. There's no access between the site and the heath. The application proposes clearing the existing site and erecting a new restaurant with drive-through facility to open 24/7. This is the proposed site layout plan. The building would be a single-storey building of 350 square metres located fairly centrally within the site here. To the front there'd be a car park with 41 spaces. That includes 2 disabled and 2 parent and child spaces and 2 electric vehicle charging points. There are also motorcycle parking spaces and a cycle shelter here for customers. The drive-through lane would wrap around the building, so entering at this point here, opening out into 2 lanes, each of which would have a canopy and a customer order display screen. Vehicles would then proceed around the back of the building to the northwest elevation, where there'd be windows in the building for payment and collection. There are also 2 parking spaces to this side of the site, where any large orders, cars would be directed to pull over to this side to save blocking the lane and causing tailback. In terms of access into the site, it's proposed to provide a new right-hand turn lane into the site within Mousehold Lane to prevent any cars turning right into the site, causing a queue and blocking through traffic along the ring road. There'd be an in and out 2-lane arrangement, so cars entering the site here, separated by a pedestrian island from the exit lane here, and that exit lane would have both road markings and signage on posts to direct customers to leave the site and turn left back onto Mousehold Lane. There's also proposed to be a separate pedestrian access at this point here into the site. That would be close to an existing pedestrian crossing on Mousehold Lane. And in the northeast corner of the site, there's a new substation proposed, and a margin along the eastern boundary here is proposed to be reserved to allow maintenance access for the landlord to an existing services kiosk. These are the ground floor and roof plans of the proposed building. On the ground floor plan here, you can see the dining area at this point, which would have space for 76 covers. The kitchen area would extend along this side of the building with the windows to serve the drive-through. Then there'd be space for customer toilets, staff space, and to the rear of the building, space for food storage, chillers and freezer. Outside the building at the rear, there'd be a fenced enclosure for refuse storage and for deliveries to be taken in. On the roof, you can see a number of items of plant which are proposed, which would serve extraction and other items for the kitchen, and they would be enclosed by a screen around the perimeter of the roof. This slide shows the proposed elevations of the building. The northeast elevation here is the one which would face towards Mousehold Lane. On the side here, the southeast elevation is where the customer entrance would be in this largely glazed section. This is the rear elevation with that fenced enclosure for refuse at the back of the building. And along the northwest elevation, you can see the windows here to the kitchen, which would also serve the drive-through facility. On the sections to the bottom, you can see how the plant on the roof would be screened and concealed within the appearance or the exterior appearance of the building. The materials proposed include a dark grey brick, timber effect cladding and stone effect cladding. 3 applications for advertisement consent have also been submitted concurrently with this application. They include proposals for signage on the building and throughout the site around it. They are being considered and will be dealt with under delegated powers. This landscape plan has been submitted with the application. It includes proposals for the hard surfaces throughout the site and also for new soft landscaping. The soft landscaping includes a hedge along the road frontage here with a fence that would be no higher than the hedge directly behind it. There'd also be areas with wildflower grassing behind and 4 trees behind that along the road frontage. There'd be areas of shrub planting either side of the access, and then around the remainder of the perimeter of the site there'd be a hedge, shrub planting, more wildflower grasses, and in total there would be 31 new trees planted throughout the site. There are also areas of hedging to conceal some fencing along this eastern boundary. To enhance biodiversity, there are proposals for bird boxes and bee posts, and also within the car park there'd be planters with pollinator-friendly planting within them. There are some existing trees outside the boundaries of the site which are proposed to be protected during construction, and an external lighting plan has been submitted which has taken account of the protection of wildlife, including that within Mousehold Heath. These computer-generated images of the proposal were provided when the application was first submitted. Following some negotiations, there have been amendments to the proposal which aren't reflected in these, but they do remain indicative of the proposal and its relationship with its surroundings. The amendments include the addition of a hedge in front of the fence along this section here. And it should be noted that although it does indicate the relationship that the development would have with its surroundings, the dwellings on the opposite side of Mousehold Lane are not shown on these images. There are various items of kind of ancillary furniture which are proposed throughout the site. This is an image of the type of railings that are proposed around the patio to the front of the building and lighting posts within that. Across the patio there would be items of seating and bins, and this is an example of the lighting poles that would feature throughout the car park. And a small shelter building is proposed on the western side of the site. It would be a timber shelter, largely open-sided, and the roof would have a sedum covering. A play frame for children is also proposed on the patio area outside the entrance to the building. And this is an example of the canopy structures and the customer order display screens that would be provided to the drive-through lanes. Moving on to some photos of the site as it exists. This is standing on the opposite side of Mousehold Lane, looking into the site towards the western half of it. This is one of two existing vehicular accesses to the site. Here you can see a placeboard fence which runs along the boundary to the neighbouring dwellings on Playford Road. And this group of trees here are within the gardens of those properties. They're not within the application site, but are proposed to be protected throughout the development. Across the rows of parked cars for sale that you can see here in the background, there are two existing garage buildings that are proposed to be demolished, and immediately behind those you can see the woodland within Mousehold Heath to the south of the site. Again, standing across Mousehold Lane and looking towards the eastern part of the site, this time here you can see the existing signal-controlled pedestrian crossing outside the site and the second point of vehicular access into it. These low railing bars are all that define the boundary between the site and the road. This flat-roofed building with the blue fascia that I think we can make out here is the sales building that's proposed to be demolished. The building beyond that with the gable is in the neighbouring garage site. And here to the foreground you can see the neighbouring shop and petrol station which open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then within the site, just looking across it to the south again, you can see the rows of parked cars on existing hard surfacing and the three buildings which are proposed to be demolished. You can also see a number of existing floodlights which are used to illuminate the site. Standing outside the site again, back on Mousehold Lane, standing further to the east and looking back towards it. Here you can just make out the junction to Corbett Avenue and the garden centre which occupies the corner of that junction. Across the road you've got the petrol station and shop, and then this is the application site in this area here. Then moving back further west and looking back towards the direction where the previous photo was taken from, the negotiations and amendments. The Highway Authority have no objection in relation to traffic and highway safety, and these have been specific concerns of objectors. Conditions securing highway improvements and a delivery management plan are necessary to ensure that access to the development is safe and acceptable. A travel information plan promotes sustainable travel options, electric vehicle charging exceeds policy requirements, and pedestrian and cycle access is acceptable. The car parking which is proposed is above maximum standards set out in the local plan, but the Highway Authority consider the assessment that this is based on is reasonable, and it is noted that it would prevent the risk of parking overspilling onto surrounding roads, which is a concern that has been raised by objectors and was raised by the Highway Authority at pre-application stage. The off-the-shelf design of the building is not unacceptable, and the development will result in significant additional soft landscaping and some improvements in the street scene compared to the existing. There is not considered to be any harm to Mousehold Heath, and a detailed litter management plan is recommended at condition 22 in your report to ensure that there is a regular litter picking regime across an appropriate area. It is recognised that the nature of the use proposed in the 24/7 opening would be a more intensive use than the existing car sales. However, it is considered that conditions can ensure that plant noise, odour, antisocial behaviour and lighting do not unacceptably harm the amenity of neighbouring occupiers in the local area. Subject to the conditions which are listed in the report, it is also considered that there have been no unacceptable impacts in terms of construction, ecology, trees, contamination and drainage, and there are considered to be benefits of the proposal in terms of employment creation and economic activity. So having taken account of the relevant development plan policies, material considerations and representations in objection and support, on balance the proposal is considered to be acceptable and is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Lorraine. Move on to questions now. Sartre, Councillor Burglar.
You will have to bear with me a little bit because this is quite complex, I think. So I'd like to talk a little bit about DM18 and DM1, which I believe on the face of it, the application would not comply with, and I'll come back to DM1 because I think that's in multiple ways. However, you justify that because of the sequential test, it does not have to be required to be in a town centre, and that we have to take the application as a drive-through coming with it because case law suggests that it has to be taken as a full application as it is. However, you'll have to advise me what case law actually is behind this, because this application only requires a drive-through because of the location. So if this was in a town centre, like McDonald's is in the city town centre, then a drive-through would not be part of the location. So it's really difficult for me to understand whether it's possible to disentangle those two. So I'd be first of all interested whether the case law specifically applies to drive-through restaurants. And if not, then I'm wondering whether the argument can be made that this part of the application is actually due to the location and therefore can't be included in justifying the sequential test for it. And then I've got another question in relation to DM1.
Thank you. So in terms of undertaking the sequential test, we have to consider a kind of broad location that the applicants identify for their proposal. In this case, there are numerous existing restaurants that the operator has across Norwich, so there are a couple within the city centre and there are others, particularly in other locations around the outer ring road. In this case, they are looking to locate a new development to the northeast of the city, so they haven't considered the city centre because they have existing stores there which serve their existing market there. They're looking to expand out into this area to serve a new local market. So because it's not within the city centre, they haven't considered a site within the centre without a drive-through. In terms of considering the drive-through as an integral part of the proposal for the purposes of the sequential test, there's been appeals and case law generally about all manner of different main town centre uses, which has established that different parts of those uses can't be disaggregated. The development which is proposed has to be considered as a whole. In addition to that, there has been specific appeals and case law which have been identified by the applicant, which do relate specifically to drive-throughs and restaurants. So it's kind of a broad body of established cases which are a material consideration that identify that any proposal can't be disaggregated into different parts of the proposed use, and then there are specific ones which relate to this proposal as well. So that's the background, and as I say, they do form material considerations that we need to take into account when we apply that sequential assessment.
You want any questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you could point out where in relation to the application site the two schools are, what schools there are, what age, and what the policy is around staying on site during lunch and other breaks. Just to justify my question, that the literature, suggests that obviously a higher density of fast food restaurants does increase obesity, especially if there is not a policy that students have to stay on site. So I'm just interested in what the schools are and where they're located.
Long way.
Unfortunately, the plan here doesn't go out far enough
No.
to show the schools. The closest one is the academy, which is on the junction of that would be Sandhouse Road and the Ring Road. That's the closest one. That's a high school. That's directly opposite to Sprowston Retail Park, where there are other hot food takeaways and facilities there. In relation to schools and the proximity of proposals like this to them, there is guidance about that and how to take that into account. The guidance is quite clear that where there is sort of public health evidence that it is a problem and that it's something which the planning system can address by looking at the concentration of those facilities, then that can justify the adoption of a development plan policy or perhaps a supplementary planning document to identify how those proposals should be considered and how the impact on schools and the health of children can be taken into account. In this case, in Norwich, we don't have that evidence. Under the current adopted plan and the Emerging Greater Norwich Local Plan, there are no policies specifically relating to that. We'll consider everything on a case-by-case basis. The public health team at Norfolk County Council were consulted on the application, but they haven't provided a response. You have to consider the application on its merits in relation to the adopted development plan. So in relation to health and well-being, obesity and children's diet, there isn't anything specific to this proposal other than the general objectives of the planning system to create healthy places that promote good well-being.
Councillor Davis?
Yeah, just to say to Councillor Bogle, there's also Sprowston High, which is about 5 minute walk from here, which is an enormous school. Much bigger than me at Academy.
Councillor Graham?
Thank you. We're looking at slowing traffic on 40 mile an hour part of the Ring Road. So I wonder what work has been done to assess the impact on journey times from, say, one of the high schools to the Norfolk and Norwich. And I have another question, but let's hear that one first.
So the application has been supported by quite a wealth of transport information and the safety audit. It's taken surveys of existing traffic movements along Mousehold Lane and looked at how the development would contribute to those, and not found that there would be any unacceptable impact, and the Highway Authority are satisfied with that conclusion. They have looked at the safety and the effect of turning vehicles into and out of the site, which is one reason why the right-hand turn lane into the site is proposed, and it's been satisfactorily demonstrated there wouldn't be any harmful delays in vehicles turning from an easterly direction, particularly in relation to the pedestrian crossing.
So it sounds like we're finding that if there's any delay to journey times is acceptable. Have I understood that right?
The Highway Authority have no concern that would raise an objection or and they haven't specifically raised any concern in that respect.
Yes.
Can I ask another question?
Yep.
And then come back to me? My other question is, if you look at paragraph 137 on page 37, we're hearing that significant changes have been made during the planning process. Can you tell me what changes were requested and not agreed? Oh, sorry, there have been some amendments to the proposal, but the applicant wishes to retain other elements. So what are the things that were asked for that the developer declined to accept?
They're predominantly the ones which are set out in the landscape officer's comments in the report. So specifically designed or focused on decluttering the site of some of the guarding and other sort of ancillary development around the site, And there were also suggestions that there could be more robust planting along the road boundary. That hasn't been adopted in the proposal to be determined.
Councillor Susans?
Right, it's my fault, bats. Now I'm not expert on bats, but I do know that I do know that the lights that the county council put in the street lights, aren't conducive to, bats in the right time activities of animals. So I had a look, but I can't see what kind of lights they're going to put in there, because we do have that sort of thing happening around in that sort of area. So what kind of lights are going to stick in?
So there are a number of lights on columns proposed around the site to illuminate the car park and the drive-through. I will come to an image of those in a moment. The application has been supported by an assessment which shows where light would, the areas that would be illuminated by that light, or the light spill as it's termed. That assessment has demonstrated that there wouldn't be any encroachment onto Mousehold Heath by the lighting that they're proposing, and having had some back and forth with the agent on that, their ecologist came back to support the proposals for lighting that have been submitted, and support the conclusion that it wouldn't adversely affect bats using the various habitats within Mousehold Heath. And I do have an image of the lighting columns. There are a couple of different ones. There are these, which would be on the patio around the building, and also these downlit poles throughout the rest of the site.
So as long as the bats stay on Mousehold Heath, they're cool, are they?
It's the ecologists are satisfied with the design as a whole, but gave specific focus to Mousehold Heath because relative to the surrounding area, that's where bats would mostly be concentrated.
Okay, we're still on questions. Councillor Champion, then Councillor Davis, then Councillor Bergline. Don't forget it's questions and not into the report. If not, we could be here all day.
Well, I just thought that was a really good point by Councillor Sands in relation to bats. I'm curious, I just picked up when you said about the ecologists, you referred to their ecologists. Have we had any independent assessment done?
Yes, in terms of the landscape and ecology issues as a whole, one of our officers has considered that, and their comments are included in the report.
And so I might have missed it in relation to the lights. My understanding is that the colours of the bulbs in relation to LED lights, different colours can have different effects. Can we make sure that we are asking them to put that we have got, I believe it's on the blue light scale, or to research that and get appropriate advice, so that I would suggest that insects will be attracted to lights. If they're going to be putting pollinator boxes, that will attract additional insects. And the idea that you won't have bats coming onto the site, I think, is frankly not true. And so I think I would very much like to ensure that this has been considered and that any application has got this as a consideration.
One of the recommended conditions is to cover external lighting, so we can, through that condition, look at that type of light and, as you say, the colour of it to make sure that that is the most sensitive.
Councillor Davis?
Thanks, Joe. Can I just come back to promoting healthy and safe communities aspect? There's going to be a children's playground on here, and they've said there's going to be increased traffic going in and out of the site. How many children are proposed to access this? Because it's not really a very healthy environment when children are going to be playing right next to vehicle fumes.
Sorry, thank you for bearing with me while I just called up the plan. In terms of numbers of children, I haven't got any specific figures on that. The restaurant would have a capacity of 76 covers, so it would be a proportion of that that may be children at any one time. The play frame is proposed within this patio area here, which is next to the drive-through lane where cars would be moving at low speed. It is protected by that guard railing. around there in terms of keeping children safe within that patio area, but it is noted that it would be within proximity of passing vehicles.
So just come back on that, because it's so close to where the cars are pulling in, there is going to be starting and stopping, so there's going to be particulates as well as the views there, and who is going to be monitoring whether children are coming over from houses locally to go and play on there? Is there anything in place to stop just local children coming to use it?
That would be for the management to consider whether it's something that they would want to discourage and to control non-customers visiting the site to use it.
Councillor Bergline, and then Councillor Stootley, then Councillor Lowick.
I've got two questions again, sorry. But coming back to DM1, which requires us to try and increase active travel and reduce reliance on private car. Now that is, your assessment was that it is not fully compliant with that policy, or doesn't fully achieve that aim. I mean, the very nature of a drive-through obviously does the exact opposite. So I struggle a little bit how under our development management policies we can justify a drive-through restaurant at all, considering that we're trying to reduce the reliance on private cars. And I've got a second question as well.
So DM1 is, it's the first policy in the development management local plan. It's an overarching policy which sets out the objectives for all development across Norwich, and they're the aspirational objectives that we're looking for all development to achieve. And obviously, in terms of sustainable travel and accessible places, then reducing the need to travel and reducing travel by private car is an important part of that. In relation to the specific proposal, that's where DM18 comes in, and how the location of this proposed development must be considered. And because it can pass the sequential test, then it is in compliance with DM18, which our assessment is that attracts greater weight because that is specific to this policy, rather than DM1 being the overarching objective for all development. So I appreciate your point.
But can I just come back on that? Because it's not only, I appreciate the location, and then, if you put a restaurant somewhere outside and you pass the sequential test, then, that increases car use to some extent. But this, it's a drive-through. It specifically encourages using the car to get to a restaurant. So isn't that in addition to what you would normally consider under DM18 and the sequential test?
But they won't be going across the city to Tutswood to use McDonald's, so that'll be less time in the car to get to that one.
I really think it is a different thing.
In terms of those numbers and the journeys that might be made to the development, the travel assessment that's been submitted shows that on a peak Saturday time, which would be Saturday lunchtime, within that hour they've estimated there'd be 49 additional trips to those which are already cars on the roads. So in those terms, we've had to consider that. In terms of sort of the principle of a drive-through in any location, there are existing ones in Norwich. There's no specific policy to resist them, and those policies that we do have to assess this against in this case, because we are satisfied that it is, it has been demonstrated to be an acceptable location, then there's no greater conflict with the other policies.
Yeah, can I just come back on that? I think it's very important that the committee doesn't try and disaggregate the two elements of it. You don't try and look at it and say that this is a restaurant, that restaurant could be somewhere else in the city centre, because you can't do that. That if you did do that, that would be unlawful. You have to look at it as a drive-through. And there isn't anywhere in our policies that says drive-throughs in and of themselves are unsustainable uses, and therefore we object to them in principle. And when we're looking for sequentially preferable locations, you have to look for sequentially preferable locations for restaurants with drive-throughs, and that's what the case law says. So I mean, even when we have had a large development for retail, if someone comes to us with an application for 6 1,000 square metre retail units on an edge of centre location, when we're looking at sequentially preferable sites, we can't say you've got 500 square metres there, 500 square metres there in the city centre. We can't do that. You can't disaggregate the uses like that.
I understand that. I think I'm more challenging the encouragement of private car use by the drive-through element rather than trying to separate them. So very much seeing that as an integral part of the application. Thank you, though. And my second question is around amenity. Now, I understand that it's not in an air quality management area. However, that doesn't mean we should not consider air quality as a amenity issue. If you correct me if I'm wrong. But obviously what it means to have a drive-through is that there is a lot more idling and it's quite close to residential dwellings. I haven't really seen any assessment of that in the report. Could you just let us know what you're thinking around that?
In terms of the vehicles idling, the vehicles which would provide deliveries and refuse collection within the delivery management plan, there are proposals within that to get drivers to switch engines off when they're stationary during delivery. So those bigger and potentially more significant emitters would have their engine switched off during the delivery times, and that is proposed to be subjected to a condition, so that's something that we could monitor and enforce if necessary. In terms of other vehicles, another condition proposed is about antisocial behaviour, and I think vehicle idling in terms of both pollution and noise could be a factor contributing to antisocial behaviour. So the management plan that's proposed to manage that, which we would look at how staff and management would monitor and respond to incidents, we'd look at how that could be done through the management plan by condition.
I appreciate that, but there's obviously the engines on while people move forward in the queue to wait for their deliveries, then pay and wait for them to be handed through the window. I don't know if people leave their engines on through the entire process of that, and that is potentially constant, and that is actually quite close where the waiting is, and then the hand through to the window. And then also the bays where people wait, where, I would probably argue in 50% of the cases when people wait, they still leave their engine on in those kind of waiting bays. That is all very close to residential housing. So you're basically putting potentially constant idling cars in front of, at the end of someone's garden. Has that been considered at all?
It's not been quantified in any assessments. One thing which would offer some mitigation is the landscaping that's proposed along the boundary, which includes a relatively high hedge, shrub planting and trees that will offer some form of buffer along there. I think that and the management plan are the appropriate mechanisms to try and deal with that. Anything else?
I just want to pick up on the policy point. That we have a policy that deals with air quality, which is DM11, and it deals with various other things as well, environmental impacts. And it talks about air quality in air quality management areas. I can't remember the exact wording of the policy, but I know that there's no requirement for an air quality management plan in an area outside of those particular areas of the city. So in a policy context, we haven't been required to request that information or consider that point in this case, but I absolutely get that.
But based on policies, is it a consideration that can be attached to amenity considerations? It would just be odd if we have nothing to go on to consider that as well.
But I think that the point that I'd like to call to members' attention is that Environmental Protection have considered the application in quite some detail, and they haven't raised air quality as an issue, and that's their area of expertise. So I take your point that the issues that you're raising, but in terms of the overall impact on amenity, whilst I'm not saying there won't be any, I think the colleagues in Environmental Protection don't believe there's significance enough to warrant their comment or indeed conditions other than the ones that Maria's already referred to.
Councillor Lowick and then Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, it's just to follow on from that. could we consider a number of amenity issues that add up to make it unacceptable for people living so close? So it's not just a question of air pollution, it's not just a question of having the noise of cars driving past and perhaps noise of people talking. It's not just a question of there being this disturbance and possible police intervention if there are issues, and according to the issues listed here, Boundary Road has had issues. I mean, all these issues add up to questioning the effect it will have on the amenity of those people living so close. Not just one of those issues, but altogether a cumulative effect and also litter, I suppose you could say.
What's your question? I mean, that was a good discussion.
Could there be a case made for the cumulative effect of amenity issues, not just one issue, but all these put together?
There could be, but in this instance I don't think there is, because looking at each individual, the section on amenity at main issue 3, starting on page 31, goes through all of these issues, and there's no comment from environmental protection on odour. I mean, and paragraphs 112 and 113 deal with odour and air pollution. They've raised environmental protection has raised no specific issue on those points. So you still have to have a measurable impact in order to determine whether one of those actually has an immunity impact. You might get to a point where they're just over a level. So taken together, they might have an impact, but there's no indication in the representations from environmental protection that any of the issues that the members are raising at the moment, either noise, air pollution, and litter and light pollution, get to a point where they are actually causing problems individually, let alone cumulatively.
Councillor Stootley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, please. Firstly, it's disappointing, of course, that we don't have relevant policies in the local plan and Greater Norwich local plan relating to health, which makes Norfolk County Council's health response all the more important. So I wondered whether any follow-up work had been done to try and gather one, because presumably the fact that they haven't submitted one doesn't mean that they support it.
We didn't receive a response to the consultation that was sent.
So is any work undertaken to try and obtain responses from those that don't respond, especially where it might be quite important like this? It's quite difficult to make a determination without that.
In this case, that specific response wasn't chased. No.
But I think it's still material that we don't have a development management policy that would support a refusal on health grounds in this instance.
Okay, that may be a serious omission from our policies. The other question now is about litter, and why was a 150 metre radius for litter picking considered satisfactory, when all members here will know that from work in their own wards, wherever there's a McDonald's, there's always litter way beyond 150 metres.
The 150 metre radius is what I understand the company's policy is, and that's what they identify as a proposal in their application. We don't consider that to be acceptable in this instance, which is why a detailed plan is proposed to be agreed by condition, and the intention with that is that we would look at probably agreeing an area over a plan rather than sort of an arbitrary radius. It might be more appropriate to agree an area that would be covered and look at it in detail to be agreed by condition.
Okay, thank you. And just following up on that, a number of people will have highlighted the fact that there's the woods, Mousehole Heath right next to this site. People take their McDonald's and drive through, go to those car parking areas and potentially drop litter there. So will that plan include a comprehensive litter picking in those areas, please?
We'll have to look to agree what area is considered reasonable and consider the likelihood of where customers would perhaps head to immediately within the vicinity of the site. So yeah, we can certainly consider those areas.
Well, just to pick up on that, I see no reason, for example, why the car parking spaces off Gurney, car parks off Gurney Road, for example, shouldn't be included in a picking plan for the site. We can take that up when we're discharging that condition.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask how many councillors asked you questions before this meeting so we could have got the answers in the report? Does it seem we've got a hell of a lot
that everyone
today?
hears the answers.
Absolutely. We all need to hear.
We all need to hear what she says.
Well,
Otherwise,
well, you would
everyone's
do
going to
because
go
they've been
individually.
written in here, the questions you ask.
No. I mean,
Yeah.
we're being very thorough. It's our job.
Yeah.
Well, it is your job, but it seemed like it was just questions, where we could have sorted these out. No one? Thank you. Councillor Bergline first.
Can I just I'll come back to David, because we've obviously got the representation from Sprowston Town Council. Now, I don't know in how far they've got environmental health input, but that they clearly have concerns around litter and noise, order and traffic, because they've asked, and light pollution, because they asked for restricted opening hours. So how much of a consideration should that be, as in terms of, you know, compared to what you'd say we have not got from Norwich City Council's environmental health team?
I'm thinking in considering the application, environmental health would have taken they went and limited themselves just to the city council's, I mentioned, boundary. They would have looked at the wider implications. Also, we've got representation. Yes, we have got representations from Sprowston. We've also got representations from Broadland. Yes. They obviously have concerns, but I think in short, I just want to reassure members that if we're not taking a parochial view and kind of just looking at the impact on Mousehole Lane, we are also looking at the impact on the wider area. We don't need to see there's impact on people, whichever authority they actually happen to live in. So, yeah, we haven't taken a parochial approach to this.
Okay, still on questions, Councillor Davis and then Councillor Lovett.
Excellent. We go back to the litter, page 32, paragraph 115. This is about the 20 metres to the restaurant, which obviously is very conditions. And it says, a detailed litter management plan across an appropriate defined area by conditions. Subsequent compliance can be monitored and enforced as necessary. Has this ever been enforced where somebody has broken the condition?
We enforce against breach of conditions fairly regularly, yeah.
So for drive-throughs, McDonald's drive-throughs?
Not specifically drive-throughs, but I mean, we have, there's no reason why this is, requiring a litter plan is a fairly standard thing for this kind of use, so it's not unusual.
Yeah, but I'm asking about specific enforcement because we know that McDonald's have this 150 radius that is their accepted measure, but we know that we find McDonald's trash all over the city from the drive-throughs. Has this ever been enforced with drive-throughs that they've already got? Because they're not managing their litter collection properly as it is.
I mean, I can only kind of really comment on this particular. I don't know whether we've actually got conditions on those other drive-throughs, but in terms of actually this being raised as a specific issue here, it is an enforceable condition.
Councillor Lovett.
Yes, we mentioned the response from Sprowston Town Council, and their feelings that the restriction on on opening hours could mitigate the impact of the amenity, the impact of the adverse impact on the amenity for neighbours. Have McDonald's presented any reasons why this has to be 24/7? It seems to me that they can adequately trade without it being 24/7, and that if it did close at say 10:30, and open again at 6 in the morning, that may well mitigate the effects on the neighbours, and is that a possibility that we could change the times of opening?
In the application, they haven't provided a specific justification for that. One thing I would say is that just because that is what they are seeking permission for, an unrestricted opening time, it doesn't mean that they would necessarily operate 24/7. In terms of whether there are impacts which would justify us restricting that, as we've been through this, there's no environmental protection objection. We have considered the amenity impact individually and cumulatively and don't consider there to be an unacceptable impact. To apply a condition that would restrict the opening hours, conditions have to be necessary and reasonable without there being an identified unacceptable amenity impact. We wouldn't have a reasonable basis on which to apply a condition to manage the hours.
Just come back on that. I think when environmental protection are kind of measuring, particularly about noise, they're looking at the existing levels of background noise, and the ring road's fairly well used route, 24/7. I mean, there's obviously times when it's a lot quieter, but you do have the existing uses, the garage and the shop, etc., which will also increase the kind of existing background noise. So their assessment has to take into account those existing noise levels. And I think that the section on noise and disturbance on page 31, it does some correspondence are kind of highlighting issues from the existing uses. Noise doesn't work on a kind of immediately cumulative level. It's not every increase in noise is actually noticeable to the human ear. But in this instance, the kind of technical assessment has concluded that even fairly late at night, it won't actually materially impact upon the conditions that neighbouring residents experience. I mean, that's not to say that members, if you are concerned about it, cannot attach a condition about noise, about opening hours. It's just that as officers we don't feel there's a reason to do so.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just so members are aware, there will be a requirement for a late night refreshment licence at this venue if they're operating after 11 o'clock, I believe. So residents and objectors will have another opportunity if members are minded to vote for this.
Any other questions? Okay.
I was just wondering, just in case members are minded to vote for this, would it be possible to condition the enhanced landscaping that our landscaping and ecology officer has requested that have not been taken on by the application?
We could. As officers, we're satisfied that what has been submitted, particularly in relation to the existing site, is a real significant enhancement, both in terms of the visual impact of the site and the interest that it will provide. So on that basis, certainly we're satisfied that what has been submitted is acceptable. It would be possible to amend the proposed condition to seek to agree an amended scheme with members wanted to do so.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? If members were minded to seek additional something over and above what you've got in front of you, I would want to know, to help us in discharging that condition, what we wanted over and above what we've got, which is like the plan on page 43.
We got more questions? Councillor Davis?
So David, for the playground, I'm really concerned about those children playing right next door to where cars are idling. Can we condition this so it doesn't have a play area? Because I do think that's going to draw local children into playing in a heavily polluted space.
That's a slightly different point to the one that I thought was being made, to be honest, because and this is, in a way, and what makes it slightly problematic if I don't know what else members want. Because, I mean, in theory, we can ask we can stick a condition on there saying, notwithstanding what's being submitted, we want you to submit a landscaping plan, and we can note if it is the committee's view that you don't want a play area. Yes.
Would it make sense to first see if it goes through before we discuss? I mean, we might waste a lot of time on discussing conditions if members are minded to vote for the other.
Actually, Laura's just pointed out to me that the play frame is, well, the location of the play frame could be changed. So I'm thinking out loud a little bit here, because the description on page 11 of your agenda item specifically refers to a play frame. So we would have to we'd have to find somewhere else for it in order to comply with the description of the development.
Councillor Graham?
I missed that. Addendum item?
No, agenda.
Oh, sorry, agenda item.
Councillor Graham?
Thank you. We've talked a bit about lighting and about decluttering. So if the application were to pass, would we be able to request that advertising consents are brought back to committee?
The scheme delegation doesn't allow for well.
It could be a calling.
We have referred applications to you before where they're associated with a planning application that we have to refer. I think that's a separate issue from the determination of this particular application. If you wanted us to do that, I think you'd need to kind of make that representation to us through in terms of the applications, and we'd have to consider that separately. Because it's not before you at the moment, so you're not actually considering those applications.
Okay, we move on to discussion now. I will move the recommendation. The recommendation is to approve, and I'll move that. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Sands. Discussion, Councillor Graham.
I'm not sure if this comes now or after the vote on approval, but I would like to amend that to suggest restricted hours.
Thank you, Councillor Sands.
Just returning to the question of lighting, I've raised this in other planning applications, both here in City Hall and in County Hall, and the question of the colour of lighting has been suggested before. There are a number of studies which suggest that amber LED lighting is less intrusive on various nocturnal wildlife than blue-white. So I'd just like it noted, perhaps for the applicant, that they might consider using blue-white LED rather than amber spectrum LED rather than blue light. I don't want to make it a condition, so I don't want to add any other complications. I'd just like that to be noted.
Councillor Bergline.
So I read into the report that the planners themselves think that this is a balanced application rather than a clear-cut one on a number of policies. And I do hear your advice, and I think part of it is based on probably a lack of appropriate DM policies which haven't been reviewed for a while on the side of the council. So therefore, with my argument, I have to rely on the overarching policies. So therefore, DM1 and the policy on amenity, which I think both of them are not so the application is not in keeping with both of these policies. And I appreciate that it is harder to argue on them if there are no specific policies, but I do think it's not in keeping with trying to increase active travel and trying to decrease reliance on private car. It is on amenity grounds. I think both litter and we're from Sprouse. I mean, if you hear from two councils that they're concerned about noise, odour, and I add my own concern around air quality, although I appreciate it's not in an air quality management area, and I think in the times we live in, probably DM11 needs to be updated for air quality to be a significant consideration in all planning applications, especially if there is, you know, idling very close to houses. So I think on both these policies, the application is not in keeping with them. It is finely balanced because I appreciate it will improve the landscaping and there will be additional tree planting, and you know, we can't disregard job creation, but in the overall finely balanced, I think it's not in keeping with our local policies.
Councillor Peake.
Yeah, just going back to the lighting again. I looked at blue lighting, because I often get blue lighting, sort of like indoor lighting. But when I looked into it, nocturnal animals, people, you know, spectacles ultraviolet to see in the dark, a blue light actually harms their eyes and causes them sort of blindness in the long run and cataracts. So the blue light, I think, should be knocked out of this one. We should go to the amber one and make that condition if possible.
Anyone?
Carry on your discussion, I'll come back on that one.
Councillor Graham.
We've looked at a number of areas where harm is recognised, but not considered to be at an unacceptable level. Litter, noise, air quality, odour, lighting. Taken together, if none of those individually would justify refusing the application, I would suggest that cumulatively, that collectively, they add up to unacceptable harm, and therefore we should refuse the application.
Anyone else? Councillor Lovett.
Yes, I agree to some extent, but I think I would be more inclined to restrict the hours and to mitigate the effects of the cumulative impacts by, you know, not having the noise disturbance or any opportunity for other disturbances, pollution and light and at night. And I think that is, you know, if people can actually sort of think that they can get a decent night's sleep, you know, then I think, you know, everything's probably more bearable. But if this is 24/7, I honestly do not think that it is necessary for it to be 24/7. There are plenty of other places that people can drive to at midnight if they do want a burger.
Next door.
Hmm?
Next door.
Next door. Oh, at the petrol station. Yes.
Sure.
There's plenty of other McDonald's that they could drive to. And so I would favour restricting the hours of opening to sort of 6 in the morning and before 10:30 at night.
Yeah. And
on the basis of cumulative health. The impact of all these amenity issues. And I mean, sitting around the table with reasonable people and hearing what everybody's had to say and thinking, if I was living in Playford Road, what would I think about it? And I just feel that, you know, being reasonable, you'd say, not at night. And you know, that would help, I think, enormously with relieving the adverse impacts of this development for the immediate neighbours.
I hear that argument, Judy, but as you said, you can do somewhere else. Why put the traffic even further and further, making pollution to go somewhere else?
I suspect the people who are wanting a burger are not local residents anyway. They happen to be driving around the ring road, you know, or on a journey somewhere. And as you say, if there's a place next door already, well, then that's answered, isn't it? They don't have to drive further. But I just think this is a step too far, and it's with all these other proliferation in takeaways, namely McDonald's around the ring. It's just not necessary.
Councillor Sands?
I was only going to comment on the question of opening hours. McDonald's will soon find, perhaps, I don't know, between the hours of 11:30 and 5 a.m. If they don't get the custom, it's not going to be economical for them to stay open, and so they will eventually restrict their own opening hours anyway. If between those hours they only get as many as a dozen, that's not going to cover their costs for staying open. So I think ultimately the opening hours will be self-regulating.
Councillor Graham?
And the point isn't whether McDonald's want to open at night, it's whether we allow them to, if they do want to. You can't really mitigate against car doors shutting, even if they're not slammed. And at night, the ring road is quieter, so the sound of shutting car doors is going to have much more impact than during the day. So I think there's a very strong case for restricting the hours if the application is passed.
Councillor Champion?
You had a point.
Sorry, I did. I mean, this is probably to Jackie, but if members want a condition prior to a vote on the application, you need to decide that.
You are actually, yes, you need, well, at the moment, you've got the recommendations that are set out in the report have been moved and seconded. We just had a discussion, not one person has moved or seconded an amendment, but presumably, but you couldn't pass those recommendations with the conditions, because what's being moved are the recommendations are set out in the report with the conditions that are set out in the report. Now, if you want additional conditions and you want to vote on those, you can suggest an amendment, and that would need to be moved and seconded. Now, at the moment, people have made suggestions, Councillor Graham, but you haven't moved it. You've made a suggestion that hasn't been moved or seconded yet. So there's no amendments on the table. If members need or wish to pass an amendment, then if it's accepted, if the application is approved and they want it approved subject to a condition, now is the point to move.
Right, 4 people. Councillor Lovely, you went first, you can go first again.
I suggest that we approve it subject to the condition on restricted opening hours and other conditions with regard to the request for a separate landscaping plan. And yeah. And
Well,
anything else
we
that
need
people want
an hour to win.
I think 10:30 to 6, but I'm open to discussion on that.
And we need a seconder for that.
Before we second it.
Could I suggest that you discuss what you want?
Okay.
If there are 2 issues at the moment, so there's a condition on opening hours and one on landscaping. I suggest you have a condition, you have a discussion about the opening hours first, and then come back to and perhaps vote on each condition separately, if that's what members are minded to do. But I think
You can be able to discussion once someone seconded it.
Yes, that's right. But at the moment, I think if you've got to formulate, it's a bit of chicken and egg here at the moment.
Yeah.
You're still in discussion at the moment. Well, it's been moved to second, but you're having a discussion. During this discussion, some people are thinking that they want a condition on opening hours. You need to discuss what you need before you move it. You can't sort of move and then keep adding on. So you need a bit of discussion before people formally move. I take it from the room that there's going to be a mover and seconding for some. So I think that's where you need to have that condition.
Okay, we'll talk about opening hours. David?
Sorry, can I suggest that Jackie's already picked up on 2 things, which is the hours of opening and landscaping has been mentioned. I think in order to pick up on some of the points that that members have made about lighting and bats in particular, we would need to amend condition 28, because at the moment condition 28 as recommended is the external lighting is implemented as submitted. I think would probably need some flex. There's no mention of colouring in the lighting information submitted at the moment, so we would actually need to secure further details. So that's a fairly easy amendment to make to that condition. So I think there's three. I think there's the alley views, I think there's the landscaping, and I think there's the lighting. So you want to take each one?
Okay, we'll take the Alderman first, see if we can get through that. Anyone else want to say anything on Alderman? I'm afraid you're not allowed to.
No. I think it might be everybody wants to speak to everybody's raised his hands and wants to.
Okay, did anyone want to say anything about Alderman?
We just break from on.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But they do need to have discussion with them because it's going to be pushed in different times.
Okay, unless they've got anything to say, planners? No, thank you. Right.
Right.
Councillor Davis, on the subject of Wildernos, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would agree with Councillor Lovett. I think 6 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. is plenty enough, and I would hate to be living with this in my backyard, to be honest. So I think people do need to go to sleep at night, and it will, door slamming on a quiet night is loud enough to wake people up. So I would agree. I think 10:30 is perfectly reasonable.
Anyone else want to speak? I mean, I'm in favour of shutting the hours down a bit, but I think 10:30 is a bit early. I mean, at night, well, even at night time, most people will drive through, so they won't be slamming doors. They won't be going into the restaurant. They'll be going through in the drive-through. And I think a lot of places are open to 11 or 12. Pubs are open 11 and 12. I mean, if someone wants something when they finish going in one of them, they can go. And even if you want to take your kids out or something like that, 10:30, I still think it's early. So I would say 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. That's me. Councillor Stewart?
Thank you, Chair. A question has come to mind just on this subject, actually. And is this restaurant proposing to have a delivery service?
Well, they all just do that, don't they?
Probably, I think, is the answer.
Well, if it says I missed that, so apologies. Which is probably why they want to have 24-hour opening. So, but on this particular subject, I will abstain on the vote because it may well come to a licensing committee.
Councillor Graham.
Carry 2 or 3 deliveries a week. But I'm just wondering if the committee think being woken up at 6 o'clock is acceptable, or if we should make it a bit later.
That's a different subject completely, isn't it?
No, it's the opening hours.
I thought she was talking about deliveries.
Yes, she did say.
She's talking about deliveries.
No, I was talking about opening hours.
Okay. Yeah. Sandra?
I'd much rather this be passed if it's passed with restricted opening hours. I've kind of, this is a new one, I agree a little bit with Keith. So I think 6 to 11, just because I think it stands the test of appeal more if we make it 6 to 11 rather than 6 to 10:30.
11 to 6.
11, no, 6 a.m. to 11.
Oh, right, I thought you meant
not the other way around.
I thought you meant the closure, sorry.
Yeah, no, so
6 a.m. to 2300.
yeah, exactly. So just because, as you say, that's kind of what we would restrict a pub to, I guess. I think that might be the more common and would sort of have the test of appeal attached to it.
Okay, we had.
If it helps on that, we do have a policy about late night uses, which talks about a midnight shutting, but that's just your side. That's the M23.
Well, the recommendation is 10:30. Judith, did you want to stick to
I'm
10:30?
happy with 11.
You're happy with 11?
If you've got policies for it.
That's 12 o'clock the policy is.
But it's pubs would shut at 11.
No. Touchwood, they clean all the
Sorry,
state.
I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I mean, it's a site-specific issue if you're actually looking at outside the late night uses in the city centre. So you need to kind of come up with an hours use that addresses the issue that you're thinking of.
So nicely, 6 to 11.
Yeah.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded.
Sorry, who's it moved and seconded?
Councillor Lovick and Councillor Bergman, yeah. So restrict the opening hours 6 to 11. Any more discussion? Move to the vote. Oh, Sue?
Just a quickie. It's going to come back to licensing anyway. Can't they do this for us?
Yeah, they
I
will.
would rely on licensing.
Well, they will, yeah. All those in favour, please show.
Recorded vote, please, and no talking while I'm calling your names out, please. So those voting in favour of this amendment are Councillor Sands, Councillor Bogeley, Councillor Champion, Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Davis, Councillor Young, Councillor Graham, Councillor Sue Sands.
Those against?
Those against the amendment, Councillors Peake.
And extensions?
Abstentions.
Yes.
Councillors Driver and Stootley for the reasons Stootley's previously given. That amendment to reduce the hours from 6 to opening hours between 6 AM and 2300 hours or 11 o'clock has been passed.
Okay, we've got another one on the table about lighting. We need someone to propose something on lighting, Sue or Mike.
Oh, you go for it.
But I simply put the proposal that the lighting be in the amber spectrum rather than the blue light spectrum for the protection of nocturnal wildlife, not just bats, there's all sorts of nocturnal wildlife, including hedgehogs on the ground who are affected by blue-white lighting.
And cowtoys. Sandra?
Could I just? I think we heard from officers that that they would have to look into what the best opportunities are, and that they just would like to open up the condition to investigate the best lighting option for wildlife and amenity.
Yeah, essentially that's it. I mean, we just need to amend the proposed wording of condition 28. I mean, we take on board the points that have been made and will no doubt be minuted. But we just need to. So condition 28 should effectively read, notwithstanding the details submitted, the detailed lighting scheme shall be submitted for approval.
Okay, move up, Mike?
Yep.
Seconded, anyone? Okay, Sue or Martin? Martin, you want to talk?
Yeah, I'll second that vote because, as I said before about the blue lighting, it doesn't just affect animals, nocturnal animals, but long term to humans, it can cause damage to humans' eyes, prolonged exposure to blue light. So that's why I'm agreeing with the motion.
Okay, is there anyone want to speak against this? No, so we'll move to the vote then on this one, unless anyone's got any other recommendations on lighting. Now, all those in favour of the recommendations will show. That's unanimous, Jackie. Thank you very much. There was one more, was that landscaping.
Yes, landscaping.
And there is a landscaping policy which we've got to go through anyway.
I think condition 25 at the moment, it's simply said in your agenda landscape implementation. That's kind of intended to refer to the submitted landscaping scheme. So again, we would need the flexibility to require an additional landscaping scheme to be submitted and agreed I think
So the landscaping agreement takes in the playpen and stuff like that. Does it?
I think we would, I mean, we're still going to have to include the
Yeah.
play frame because that's in the description of development. We can have a discussion with the applicant about where it goes and perhaps the form it takes. But we still have to include it somewhere within the development.
Councillor Stootley?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was looking at the plans and the way that this is set out and structured, I can't actually see where you put the play park play area without it being on the other side of one of the lanes. So there's no safe space to put it. Currently, well, that's stated. Do you have in mind somewhere we could go where it would actually be safe? Because I don't like the idea of children crossing the road, even if cars are slow moving.
I mean, I'm going to kind of put that back to what's the issue that that members are seeking to resolve with specific regard to the playground? Is it road safety or is it air pollution? Because if it's the latter,
The play frame shown on the map.
Yeah.
I mean, for example,
play frame,
on the
yeah.
plan on page 43, you can see where the. Can you get the plan? Oh, I'm just going to turn the light on. Could you point out, Maria, where the play area is at the moment?
There.
On page 44, you can see it well on the illustrations.
I mean, at the moment, a little bit further north from that, there's cycle parking. I mean, you could, if the issue was mainly car vehicles idling in the drive-through lane, you could move it a little further north, and that would get the play frame further away. Alternatively,
Where is north?
Just
Would you,
Top of the map.
so you would move it further?
Away from the building.
Can you highlight where the cycle stores are, Maria? So you could swap those over.
I think, I mean, it does look like it is attached to the restaurant. And so it does look like, I mean, it's normally attached to the seating area and the restaurants. You can see the children, isn't it? So I don't know.
Visual.
Personally, I think it's okay. I can understand the reasons why they want to get rid of it or move it because pollution. But this is McDonald's. The kids have got to play somewhere. I mean.
So, I mean, I must admit, when Councillor Boberline raised the issue, I appreciate that Councillor Davis maybe has a different take of it, but you were maybe talking about some of the actual plans around the site boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, we can review the position of the play frame, taking on board the points made by Councillor Davis, and then it's up to us to try and find the best solution within the confines of the scheme.
Can I just ask, so if people are concerned about a play area in the vicinity of idling cars, it will come with this application? Like it's part of the application?
That's what they've applied for. So going back to the point about what members might want to see in the wider landscaping scheme, is there any guidance that you can kind of give us?
Well, I was talking about the hardscaping, I guess, in front of the. I know there was a suggestion from our landscaping officer to improve, basically, towards the road, more hard landscaping. And I think there was a suggestion that the hedges, the height of the hedges should be increased, which hasn't been taken into account.
That has been addressed.
Okay.
Could they put the playpen on in the grassy area?
Well, I think it's important that the play area is overlooked by the restaurants because parents want to keep an eye on their children.
Yep.
Across the lane.
Yeah.
Cars.
Okay.
So, I mean, we don't have to capture all of this in the wording of the condition, but I think when we're trying to discharge it, I think we've got to feel that we want more of the stuff that the landscape. But we've got more of what the landscape officer actually wanted in the proposal, so we need to push more for some of those.
Okay, someone's going to move that. Sandra, Councillor Bergline, seconded. Councillor Graham.
Thank you.
Any discussion on this? Councillor Young.
I'd like wording.
Sorry, not entirely landscaping, but I think it's heavily related to what we've been talking about idling cars, which I think is a real concern, because they're saying it's going to be about 12, idling cars, certainly at peak times is pretty typical. Is there any condition that there should be no idling signs? I'm not sure how effective they will be, but even if they're a little bit effective, that's better than none. So I would want to see lots of no idling, strong signs to encourage people to switch off their engines.
I think we've got a condition, and Maria alluded to in response to questions, we've got a condition about antisocial behaviour management, and we can include that within the details to secure through that plan. So again, we'll take those comments on board when we're discharging that condition.
Councillor Chairman.
I know that we're meant to be just in relation to landscaping, we're worried about the safety of children with relation to the road. On the perimeter of the site, if I understand, there's going to be holes created for small mammals, which I presume are hedgehogs. There's going to be, they're doing litter picks, they're saying they're doing all these litter picks, but there's going to be rubbish, there's going to be encouragement of hedgehogs into the premises. Is there going to be anything to mitigate squashed hedgehogs? Because just inviting hedgehogs into an area that is going to be perpetually being used by cars. There's a landscaping point that just struck me as something which wasn't sitting well in my mind. Is there any way to mitigate that?
Do you have any suggestions of how that can be mitigated?
To have raised boundaries around the area of the road, possibly, to discourage hedgehogs from
Climbing.
Right.
Like what?
Like hedgehog speed bumps. I don't know. It was just something. It just struck me that it seems tokenistic. A lot of what I'm reading in this report, this is discussion and so I can say it, I just feel like a lot of it was just very tokenistic. We'll do this, we'll do that, we'll tick these boxes, bare minimum. Look, here's some holes for hedgehogs, invite all the cars in. It doesn't feel like it's going to be, it doesn't feel like a hedgehog-friendly site. When I look at this application, and then I just see this little tokenistic, we're going to create hedgehog holes. I'm just a bit like, is that nice? Are we actually being beneficial here, or is this just sort of more tokenism?
I think the point that you're raising could be addressed by condition, and I think that I hear what you're saying, but I think the measures that would be required to achieve what the issue that you're raising could be achieved by condition. We haven't actually got at the moment. We've got condition.
Can we do the same?
Condition 4 under ecological mitigation. So we're anticipating requiring additional details to sort of. Well, I think if we weren't, we can. So condition 4 doesn't actually need, and as recommended, doesn't need amending, because it simply says ecological mitigation. We can broaden that out to require further details of ecological mitigation and take on the points that you're raising about actually, you're getting small mammals onto the site, what actually happens when they're actually on the site. So we can cover that through that condition.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Anyone else want to speak on that? Councillor Davis.
Again, this is goes back to nitpicking, so I don't really know where this sits. But are you happy, David, to condition that they nitpick along Gurney Road as well, those areas?
I don't think that would be unreasonable. So I think when we're discharging that condition, we'll put for that.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Okay, it's been mentioned by Jackie. She haven't got the words yet, and it's been agreed and seconded
for
the last one.
And that's when I was getting
For
rid of free buffer.
Landscaping.
Yeah, sorry, can you remind me what condition it is?
We're on the landscaping one.
So we've got condition 25, which talks about landscape implementation. That would simply be reworded to be our standard condition, I would suggest, which requires details of landscape, the landscape details to be submitted and agreed, just using our standard wording.
Okay. Councillor Graham, on this subject?
On the litter picking along Gurney Road,
It's not part of this condition.
That is.
I'm suggesting that it is.
Those are conditions of landscape.
Landscape.
Can I suggest that before we get into sort of like more general, we've had sort of some general conversation. I quite understand about the hedgehogs, but the litter picking is a separate thing, and I think we need to vote what's on the table, please.
Anyone else want to talk on landscaping? No. Yes. Councillor
Or
Stookley.
perhaps explain why litter picking isn't part of it, please.
Well, I mean, litter picking is a separate condition, and if the point that you're raising is about litter picking on the site, then that would also be covered under. I'm sorry, I don't understand the connection between landscaping and litter picking.
No, you've agreed that litter picking on Gurney Road is reasonable and we can push for it. I think we need to make it a condition so that it can't be refused.
Yes. But we're doing the landscape one first.
Please
Within the site.
It gets very muddled for people watching, listening, and people taking part. So we do need to. We've had it moved and seconded by yourself, Councillor Graham, Councillor Bogerline, to amend condition 25 so that details of landscape and details to be subject to.
Okay.
In line with some of the comments that members have made during this meeting.
Yes, we'll vote on this. All those in favour of that? Oh, Councillor Stookley. Nearly.
Thank you, Chair. It seems that this design is actually flawed because you've got cars going around three sides of the building, and the seating and play area was being put right next to where there would be parking cars. A better design would have those in front of the building. And I think David has confirmed that we have to, when we vote on this, we're voting on having a play park or play area rather within this site.
Yes, we are. That's because that's part of the description of the development. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That informs my vote on this.
Councillor Chairman.
Sorry, I know that we're discussing this a lot, but the another point that's in relation to the location of the cycle storage. There is literally hundreds of students who will walk past this going to Scrouston High School every day because they come across the heath and then they also come up from Scrouston Road direction. So they're going to be walking past and cycling past. When I look at it, I'm just a bit concerned about the pedestrianised entrance, and it doesn't feel like it's very safe. You're going to have a lot of young people who are going to be coming into this premises at the beginning and end of school, and I just don't see how they're going to, they're going to be dealing with a lot of cars, a lot of entrances. Have they considered any cycling entrance being considered? Is that for safety? Is that been something which is, or did I miss that in the paper?
The position of the cycle stall has been amended since it was first submitted to a much more prominent and accessible location. That might need to be reviewed if we look at a new position for the play frame. It was initially much further back in the site here where it couldn't have been conveniently accessed and it didn't sort of encourage use of it. So moving it to the front to this position by both the access which can come from the footpath here and across the car park or by the other vehicular access was considered preferable to the original position. But as I say, if the play frame is moved to any other position, then that might require reconsideration of where the cycle store is as well.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, just in relation, it's just, you're going to have teenagers cycling through, they're going to go on the footpaths. I just don't feel my inner teacher, I've watched a lot of teenagers over the years doing a lot of reckless behaviour, and I look at the design of this. You're going to have teenagers coming in on the road, going straight onto the footpath, cutting across parking spaces to get to that cycle storage. I just feel it's potentially quite dangerous, and I just would like it to be given some consideration.
Well, I think in essence it has. I mean, they're crossing a car park, which I'd suggest is not actually that much different to any other car park. They're not going to be, excuse me for standing different, but they're not actually going to be going through drive-through lanes on their bike. They're going to be accessing the restaurant across a car park. So the speeds of traffic as moving around that car park are fairly slow. And there are defined pedestrian routes across the car park, probably more because of the nature of the use, more than you would necessarily have. So I don't think. I mean, I hear the concern, but I don't think that I don't think the layout in and of itself is flawed to such an extent that it creates an unacceptable impact on that particular use group.
Can we vote on landscape?
Yes. We'll move to the vote on landscaping now. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour of the recommendation to change it?
To change landscape.
Quite details.
Yes.
It's been moved and seconded by Councillors Bogle and Gray. Right, so voting in favour, Councillor Driver, Councillor Bogle, Councillor Champion, Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Stookley, Councillor Davis, Councillor Peake, Councillors Young, Councillors Graham and Councillor Susan.
All those against? Abstention?
Councillor Mike Sands is abstaining.
So that's been approved.
That's been approved.
That was the last one we were talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So if
There have been three. You've got additional conditions for. So the recommendation, if it's set out in the report, as it has previously been moved before we discussed it, so you've got the condition to approve it subject to, and you've approved the following conditions to be included, which would be the time limitation, lighting and landscape.
Okay, so we'll move to the Councillor Stookley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Weren't we going to talk about litter picking?
That's already been covered.
Okay. Can we make a specific recommendation or recommendations for where that litter picking takes place? Because as ward councillors in the area and with other knowledge of the area, we know that there's going to be issues along some of those routes. So, for example, the routes to the schools should be covered. And I think it's not unreasonable to expect not just the car parks not burning though, but the wider area within one of the most important areas of Norwich, the Mansell Heath.
Can we actually do that, because one's in the city and one's in the county?
The condition is attached to a development within the city, so
we can't tell them to do the schools. That's the other side.
Well, yes, we can.
Okay.
Because the development that whose impact you're mitigating is the condition is attached to our this particular development. So that kind of comes back to my point about we haven't just looked at the impact on the city. We've got to look at the impact on the surrounding area. So we can require them to do picks in Broadland. Again, I hear what you're saying. I'm concerned that we're trying to be very prescriptive about the wording at the moment. I think what we would, I think it would be sensible in discharging the condition if we actually contacted local members or actually
there's a long way up there.
Take up the points that you've raised. I'm concerned if we actually list specific areas now, we might miss something. So I would rather take on the points that you've made and other councillors have made consistently, and kind of include those in a broad scheme.
I agree, I think that's a much better way of doing it.
Councillor Champion?
I was going to echo what Councillor Stupely was saying, specifically in relation to students cutting through household heat and the broader litter issue, which is likely to emerge as a result of students buying food and then cutting through the heat on their way home. So, yeah, just echoing what Councillor
Are you a
said.
sewer board councillor?
Pardon me?
You're a sewer board councillor.
I am a sewer board councillor.
You'll be contacted.
Okay, we'll move on to the recommendation is to approve with the conditions what we'll set out afterwards. All those in favour of the recommendation to approve, please show.
And it's a recorded vote. So those voting in favour of the amended and substantive motion or recommendations. So it's councillor.
No, this is the main application.
Main application with all
with
the
the 3 new conditions.
which you all wanted.
But that doesn't. That,
No, I
yeah,
know
that's
it's
right. Councillor
Beautiful.
Driver, Councillor Mike Sands, Councillor Lubbock, Councillor Peake, Councillor Sue Sands.
All those against, please show.
Those members against are Councillors Bogerline, Councillor Champion, Councillor Davis, Councillor Stukeley, Councillor Young, and Councillor Graham.
Well, that's been lost, I believe.
It's been lost, so that
Thank
has
you.
now been. Our members now need to look to see what the reasons were. For it's not being determined at this stage.
Councillor Bergline, this will be a hard one because all those extra things you put in at the end.
No, it's that's what we have to. So I would suggest. So what I heard was that there is the issue of the play equipment, which is part of the
Which you
substantive
decided to sort out.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Thank you. So I don't know how you would put that into the justification for voting against it. I would need some advice. I personally would bring forward that it's not complying with DM1, and I can't remember which one the immunity one is.
DM2 or DM11? DM2 is about general residential community, DM11 is about environmental impact.
Both.
Okay.
And in DM1, I mean, there's the active travel, there's the healthy environment, which might also be in line with the play equipment issue.
Just on the point about play equipment, I think if we comes out case the committee has actually just determined that a condition would address that issue.
Which is what I said.
But we've also heard a discussion that the issue can potentially not be fully addressed because it is part of the application. Where do you move it? I mean, there's nowhere to move it that's not in direct vicinity of idling cars. That's just a fact.
I hear that point, but notwithstanding that, the committee has just determined that the issue could potentially be addressed by condition.
With those conditions.
Or not.
Councillor Stupely.
I don't think we agreed that it would be mitigated. We agreed to a wider landscaping plan. We sought a wider landscaping plan, and within that, this was the one issue that we, because I asked a specific question on it, that this was the one issue that was not covered and not fully mitigated because you stated that we couldn't remove it. And that was the one issue. So voting for those wider landscaping requirements in order to vote sensibly on it, you couldn't vote against them because then you'd be voting against other mitigation.
I hear that, and I kind of understand your logic, but I think I still feel professionally that our case on that particular issue is not particularly strong.
Okay, but the comments that we made about the play area during the discussion are on video, and it will be clear to in any appeal that our concerns were around that specifically.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I think David has a point about the siting of the play area, but what we can't mitigate with or without the condition is the first concern that Councillor Davis wrote, which was about children crossing the road to use the play area. there's nothing that's going to take that play area away from a busy main road.
So is this the reason you turned it down, just because of the play area? Has someone moved it?
Several reasons.
Yeah, we've given several
Well,
reasons.
where's the other reasons?
Well,
Only
if you
heard-
look at DM1, it's active travel, it's a healthy environment, it's amenity for neighbours, which we've discussed in length, that we feel that there's a cumulative impact on the amenity of neighbours under both DM2 and DM11. So I think, that's good reason. And I do feel that the play area falls within DM1 as well, where we're concerned with a healthy environment, including for children.
Okay, I just think we built it on restricting the time to help the community and the people living around there.
Yes, but you can't, you can still...
Yes, I know it's
We've got an
independent.
application, Chair, that's not been determined, so we need to
Yeah,
find
no.
reasons for why it's refused.
Which I'm trying to find them.
Yeah.
Have you got enough reasons there?
No, sorry.
Thank you.
Again, the point about amenity, you've got no evidence in front of you from the consultation responses from environmental health or any other body to suggest that one of these issues is in and of itself a problem, let alone a cumulative issue.
But what about the responses from Sprowston Town Council and Broadland? They both raised it as an issue, and I also do feel, I just feel the air quality issue hasn't been addressed at all by environmental health.
Well, I still feel that if you were to refuse it on amenity grounds, there is little to no evidence to actually support that reason for refusal. I could not stand up, or one of my officers could not stand up and say that environmental health say it's going to be noisy, or it's even going to approach levels that actually have an impact. So I can't make a cumulative, I can't really make a cumulative argument that those issues are actually substantially strong enough to warrant a refusal.
What about issues based on DM1, which it clearly, very clearly, does not comply with?
I think an argument on DM1 is probably the best option that you've got.
Would you like me to repeat my argument on DM1 as best as I can in layman's terms? So, DM1 requires us to reduce reliance on private cars and requires us to encourage active travel. So, that application goes directly against it. That also, I think that's also evidenced by the applicant actually increasing the required number of car spaces for a development like that. So they very much acknowledge that, private car use is encouraged by it. In addition to that, it's within the vicinity of 2 schools, and both of them at an age where children are not required to be on site. And all the evidence shows that if there is an increase in density of fast food outlets without a requirement of students being on site, that increases public health concerns. In addition, I don't know if that can come into it, but Councillor Davies and Stutley have both raised concerns around the play area, which again fall under DM1, of us having to consider where children play, not only children that visit the restaurant, but potentially also children from the local area. That's the best I can do.
It's down to you what you want to do with it. I would steer away from the play area argument. I don't think it's part of DM1. I think it's a site-specific issue. If you think it's unsafe and you want to refuse it on that point, don't try and lump it in with DM1. I still maintain I don't think it's a good reason for refusal, but you're entitled to attach it if you want. I think the best argument that the committee has is the general sustainability of the use, and that it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't discourage. Sorry, rephrase that. DM1's great start, it doesn't encourage travel by non-car modes. I think that's probably the best reason for refusal.
And it also encourages use of private car.
I'm just thinking about the wording of DM1s. I think specific. I mean, if it's worded differently, we'll include it in the reason for refusal. But from memory, the wording of DM1 specifically aims to encourage travel by non-car modes.
I mean, that is my main reason to vote against it, but I defer to other councillors. I would be happy to include the site-specific reason of the play area, because I know that was a reason that others voted against it as well. So, I personally would be happy to add that as well.
Councillor Stirling?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The reasons that Councillor Owen has made relating to DM1 are relevant. In fact, there was a number of issues with this. While there were some redeeming features of the whole site, and there was a few that sort of tipped the balance for me. And one of them was the play park. I think it's a poor design to have a play area right next to where we know that we're idling cars. And in all good conscience, I could not vote for that. Whether it's moved 20 feet in one direction or another, there's still going to be idling cars queuing for their food there. I couldn't vote for that.
Just to go back to the DM at one point, there is a section in it that talks about encouraging use of reducing dependency on the private car. So that fits nicely with the point you were going to make this.
Councillor Graham?
Thank you. I'm not sure if we can include this or not, but local councils are spending a fortune on building roads to reduce journey times. How could we possibly allow a development like this on a 40-mile-an-hour ring road to slow it down and undo all that effort to reduce journey times?
Can I ask, the reasons have been set out, can I ask if the planning officers will look at this and come up with something to bring it back before we, or just to go forward?
We need to formulate. I mean, we've got.
Well, someone needs to vote up and down, and we ain't getting nowhere.
Well, I think I've provided reasons, and I think we've also agreed to the site-specific.
What is usual is that you move your recommendations as Councillor Bowdler has kindly done, and it's seconded and then it goes to the vote. But if it's to refuse and it's against office of things, that's normally they've refused it for the grounds as discussed above, and asked the head of planning and regulatory services to put it into planning terms, and then that's when you get a paragraph in the minutes with all the policies.
And it does take time. It's
always something.
But David is saying you haven't got a reason.
I'm not saying you haven't got a reason. I'm trying to analyse on the strength of the different reasons. But I do need to know whether there's one reason or whether there's two reasons or whether there's three reasons. At the moment I've got one reason, which is the DM1 doesn't encourage, it increases dependency on the private car and doesn't doesn't promote travel by non-car modes.
What about the density of fast food outlets? Is that something
I don't think there's anything in DM1 that would actually support that. Unless...
I'm pretty sure I read in the report that it requires us to consider a healthy environment as well.
Councillor Graham?
I think it's a real shame that public health and environmental protection appear to have snored, so I hope we can chase them.
Improve health and well-being and support healthy lifestyles. I mean, I even think that makes us...
I think my point is that it is about the density of fast food. We might use that in supporting that reason, but there's nothing in DM1 about densities of fast food and stuff.
Okay, fine.
We would have to use that as a supporting argument, but you're right, there is a bullet point in DM1 about health and well-being
And does that actually also make the site-specific issue of the play area related to DM1?
I don't think so. I think that is a design issue for this particular site. So if you wanted, I think that's a separate reason for refusal if you do want that, for the reasons that members have kind of highlighted. Children having to cross.
I think it should be in there because it is part of the voted against.
Okay, so that's two reasons for refusal. DM1 for the reasons that we've described about encouraging fencing in private car and not helping to reduce travel by non-car modes. Plus, it goes against, it fails to maximise opportunities for improved health and well-being. And then a second reason for refusal, based on the issues as discussed about the location of the playground, which is a part of the development.
Okay, people, Councillor Sands?
I was only going to comment that if you omitted the play frame or play area altogether, all that is going to happen is that children are going to cross the road which circulates through the system and run around amongst the landscaping, and that would actually increase the danger to children. So I think all these arguments are very, very spurious.
Anyway, that's been proposed and
It hasn't yet. We need to vote on it. We've got a reason. We need to vote again on these reasons that Councillor Bokeland's proposing. Who's seconding?
Councillor Champion. Yeah. Councillor Stutley?
Have we included NPPF 8 promoting healthy and safe communities?
I didn't hear that.
Can you? I think we've got a handle. I hear what you're saying, but
so we didn't hear.
NPPF 8 promoting healthy and safe communities.
And again, it was regarding the proximity of the seating and play area to idling cars.
I think we've got the points. If we can come up with the policies, but we'll have a look at NPPF 8 and we'll do that.
And just to say, if and when or if it comes to appeal, we'll get a chance to outline our reasoning behind it anyways.
So the normal practice in that case would be that the mover and seconder would get the opportunity to engage with the appeal process.
So maybe then, Ian, if you want to second, then they get the opportunity to write it to the planning inspector your reasoning behind it.
Sorry. Everyone gets the opportunity to write to the planning inspector. When I'm talking about our statement of case within the appeal, it would be the mover and seconder that we would approach.
Okay, it's been ruled by Councillor Bergline and seconded by Councillor Stutley. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
So we are voting now to refuse the application for the reasons given.
Yeah.
So it's Councillors Bogerline in favour, Councillor Champion, Councillor Stutley, Councillor Davis, Councillor Young and Councillor Gray.
All those against, please show.
Those voting against are Councillors Driver, Sands, Lubbock, Peake and Sands.
And
so it has been refused.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much for that item.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you. I appreciate we're not the easiest.
It keeps me on my toes.
Okay, we're just going to have a 5-minute break for anyone who wants to use the
Thank you.
toilet.
We're still on the first line.
Yes, we are.
No, not
We move on with the application. We will move on to 4B, and then we will do 4D after that one. 4C will become last now, because we have got people waiting to speak. So if we move on to 4B, which is on page 45 of our agendas to page 68, and we ask our planning officer to take us through the report. Thank you.
And look how the logo is even on the
Good morning, everyone. This application is for the site of 2 modular classrooms and creation of a seating area within the school grounds. Associated with this, there's also proposed additional scooter and cycle storage, and also a fire hydrant proposed.
Could I ask you to put the microphone?
Oh, apologies. Is that better?
Talk a little bit louder.
I'm sure.
Okay. Right, so I draw your attention to the update sheet first. The first paragraph is on the back of the fact that the 2 modular classrooms have already been sited. They were needed by the school for this academic year, and one of the proposed conditions was to install a fire hydrant prior to installation. But obviously, because it's retrospective, that can't happen, and so proposed is to change the condition to within 12 months of the decision rather than prior to installation. The second paragraph is an update on comments made by Councillor Julie Rowe-Carlton, and she has been in correspondence, I believe, with the applicant, and she's now in a position to support the planning application, and concerns have been addressed that she raised earlier. The third paragraph draws your attention to an application that is currently being submitted. It's not the topic of today's meeting, but it is for another, it's for the continuation of a modular building that's already on the site, which I'll go on to explain a bit more detail later. The final paragraph, apologies, it's a typographical error correction. The conclusion of the report proposes approval, and the first condition is a standard time condition, whereas it should have been a 5-year temporary condition instead. This plan shows the Angel Road Infant School. The red line is the main vehicular access from Angel Road, and then the siting of the 2 modular buildings. One would be here, or one would be there, and this would be the proposed seating area. In terms of the wider site, the blue line is the boundary of the school. So as you can see, it's a relatively large site. They've got this main sports field over here. This is an informal grassed area. And then we've got Waterloo Park to the north, or northwest. These are a couple of tennis courts that I believe aren't actually being used at the moment. This building here is the YMCA building, which also has a children's nursery and a cafe and a sort of indoor playground. And the row of terraces along the south. These 2 sections are also tennis courts, but I believe they're also not used, but one is currently used for car parking. So the buildings that we're considering today are building 1 siting here and building 2 sited up to the north. I included this map from Google Maps because this, I think, gives you a better understanding of the arrangements on the site. For instance, this area here isn't buildings, it is a tarmac playground. So one of the modular buildings,
No. Trying to connect other stuff. So apologise. So one of the modular buildings would be sited here on this small tarmac area, and the other on the grassed area down here. It's probably worth noting at this stage that you can see from this view that there are two marked courts here and here, and for those with very good eyesight, you might be able to see the athletics track going around the edge of the playing field, which just sits alongside the proposed modular buildings. They would be fairly standard construction. They would be finished in a green khaki colour with aluminium fenestration and aluminium grey roof. The access would be 3 points on both. So you'd have 2 sets of staircases, one to each classroom, and then a ramp on the other side, which could provide disabled access into either section. Internally, they are served with their own toilets and their own stores. So although there's obviously a direct relationship to the school, the classes themselves can be relatively independent during quite a lot of the school day. This is building 2. It's essentially the same capacity, but it's just slightly different in terms of the location of steps and stairs. The proposed seating area is also proposed use would be as an outdoor classroom. So it's in a relatively unused part of the school grounds at the moment. And the idea is to have, if you like, regular steps alongside each side, and then a more sort of wider steps in the centre, as shown by this little person, where it could be sort of used as a seating sort of social area, in addition to the outdoor classroom proposal. You can see that there is a tree on the bank, that's a lime tree. There is the RPA plotted on this plan, which is the dotted line there. So some of the proposed steps would be sited within the RPA of the lime tree. Oh, sorry, root protection area, RPA. The proposed fire hydrant would be sited within the tarmac play area over here. And this is an indication of where the additional cycle storage and scooter storage could be sited. However, we would propose conditioning the details. This is a view from the playground looking towards the modular units, and the school is just there in the background. As I alluded to earlier, it is partially retrospective. So this building here is one of the ones that we're considering today. These two are subject to different planning applications that I'll talk about later. And at the time of my visit, the second unit wasn't there, but I understand it is now, which is in this far corner. So effectively, it's a row of modular buildings on the edge of the playground. This is a slightly different view looking towards the school again, and you've got another modular building to the rear, and again you can just see the main school building in the background. This is looking from the school towards the modular buildings. This is the smaller playground to the north, where one of the modular buildings is proposed. That's the boundary with Waterloo Park, which is Grade 2 Historic Park, Grade 2 Historic Park and Garden. This is the proposed seating area, so the new seats would be down here, and that's the lime tree. And this is the large tarmac playground with fire hydrant proposed over in this corner. So this plan identifies the relationship with the existing modular buildings on site. So some of you may be aware that academy schools now come under our jurisdiction as a local planning authority, whereas previous to that all schools were county council. So this school was transferred to academy in 2019, and so we've got a mixture of planning history on site. This building here was previously approved in 2005 by Norwich County Council. It is understood that it's now lawful because it's been there for so long. This one, we as a City Council recently approved it. We gave it a relatively short temporary consent, which expires in next December. This one up here was again granted consent by Norfolk County Council. The permission has elapsed, but we have just received an application from the Academy for its retention, which hasn't been processed yet, so I can't give you any further update on that one. So in terms of the proposal, the proposed modular buildings are required by the school to accommodate years 5 and 6. The Angel Road Junior School, thank you. I said to myself before this meeting not to confuse them. So the Angel Road Junior School is currently closed, and the pupils 4, 5 and 6 from the junior school are proposed to be accommodated in these 2 units. So there'd be a total of 4 classrooms, serving as additional years. The Academy has submitted a statement which outlines their future intention. The modular units aren't proposed to be a permanent solution. They are a solution to address the position that they find themselves in. They simply can't accommodate them in junior school at the moment, and they're looking at funding and ways to accommodate the pupils in a more permanent building long term. But today's meeting is about siting these 2 units. It's not about the long term proposals. Sorry, I'll just go back to So I was just going to refer you to the open space and playing fields. So this whole area here is designated open space. So therefore we have to consider the potential partial loss of the open space under DM8. And we also consulted Sports England. The site, as I said earlier, is relatively large, and in addition, the site of the modular units isn't on any part of the formal playing field. So on the basis of that, we haven't had an objection from Sports England, and we considered that the temporary site of the modular units wouldn't have a significant impact upon the wider open space. The design of the units, are considered acceptable. They are sort of what you would expect from modular units. In terms of any mitigation, the colour themselves are considered to reduce the impact. The wider views, as you saw with the photos, is of the wider playing fields and the boundary of Waterloo Park, and so tying with the green sort of subdues the impact. The bottom is served with timber slats, and all the accesses, so the ramp and the steps are timber as well. So again, it's relatively sympathetic to the area. The impact upon the lime tree for the proposed seating has been considered. The arboriculturist has responded saying there'd be no objection if we added a condition asking for arboricultural supervision. So that means any work within the root protection area would have to have an arboriculturist on site to make sure there's no undue harm on the lime tree. I'm just going to briefly mention nutrient neutrality. The proposal wouldn't increase the provision in terms of schooling. It is addressing a local need and transferring pupils from a school that is sited pretty much opposite the road, opposite on the other side of the road, so it's not considered to be increasing the number of pupils within the campus area. So in conclusion, whilst modular buildings aren't necessarily the best in terms of high quality design, they are considered acceptable in this case to address a very immediate need, and we would be putting a 5-year temporary permission on to allow the school to address their position in the long term, require the additional appropriate funding, and submit any planning application that they may need. And so our proposal is to approve with the conditions, and again just to highlight it with a temporary 5-year, not a permanent permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Move on to questions. Councillor Bergerine.
Thank you. I've got some questions regarding the planning history and moving forward. So my first question is, so I understand that the building that currently has got planning permission until 2023 did not have a 5-year condition, but a shorter one. So I would just like you to explain why you think this should be a longer one when we have to take consideration to a very recent planning application that had a much shorter, or was it 5-year? Was it 5 years as well?
No, I think it was 2, and that's what they asked for in that case.
Okay.
We weren't minded to allow them extra time in that case. In this case, they asked us for 10, and we're restricting it down. Okay. I mean, that kind of comes on to the question why they're now thinking that there is a 10-year timescale, but we'll get to that in a second. Then my second question is that I'm not sure, but in one of the representations, I think I read that Norwich City Council, at the time when it came to Norfolk County Council, objected to the modular building. Could you explain how we should take that into account and why the Norwich City Council no longer objects to the modular building?
I mean, the fact that permission was ultimately granted is the baseline that you're looking at, and that potentially changes the way that this application is determined. So the fact that this council sometime in the past objected to a proposal which was subsequently granted planning permission and implemented by another authority, you're in a slightly different scenario now, so you've not found a 5-year objection previously.
Okay, and my final question is, I mean, there's obviously the case that one of them already has transitioned into a lawful occupation or whatever because 10 years have lapsed. Can you just explain how that works if they continue to have temporary planning conditions? If they add up to 10 years, do they become lawful, or does it start from?
No, it's only when they start breaching. So it's only when they actually do something that there's a change of use without the benefit of planning permission. So granting temporary planning permissions which add up to or exceed 10 years does not make it lawful. They still become unlawful when the commission ends. So you clock 10 years starts at the end of that period.
Councillor Sands, then Councillor Davis.
Could we go to the slide showing the plans of the units, please? It's page 61 in our pack for everybody else. I have a question about.
Sorry, I don't know which pattern you're on.
It's the one, it's page 61 in our pack, it's, I don't know what slide it is for you, but it's the one showing the plans of the units.
This one.
Is that the right one?
That's the correct one, yeah. Now, I've taught a million times in these kinds of units, and the rear doors are usually considered to be fire escape doors. You know, my question is, you have a ramp at the front. Now, having taught in a classroom for children who a couple of times had children in wheelchairs, my question is, how do they access the fire escape if that's steps? They can't go down the ramp which is at the front. So I would like to know what provision is there for wheelchair users to access the fire escape doors at the back, at the rear of the unit. And quite often when they have fire drill, schools require teachers and classes to use the fire doors as if it was a real fire. So what provision is there for wheelchair users, please?
I would imagine that, I mean, the compliance with the regulations is not necessarily a planning issue, it's down to usually down to building with. But I would imagine that in the same way that with this building, if anybody can't use the stairs and the lift is out of action, then alternative provision has to be made either through a chair, that you can evacuation chair, or some other provision.
I'm just not seeing it, so I was a bit concerned, that's all.
Councillor Davis?
Thanks. This is again about the existing modular buildings, page 47, paragraph 5. So we've got one which is granted by the exemplary consent, which lapsed on 1st July 2017. Why has that not been followed up in 5 years?
It's a little bit of an unusual situation because the permission was granted by the county, and so we've confirmed that we as a city council can now take enforcement action if we want to, but it wasn't something that we as a city council were monitoring because it wasn't our decision, our application. So we have been in contact with the planners in the county council about this site, which has led to the recent submission of the application, which will be processed in due course.
Can I just ask on there, did the county inform the academy, when I went all to academy, that these things had to be done?
I don't believe that happened at the time that it was
So the
handed
county
over,
did
but
bother
I
to tell them that they
don't know.
needed to renew this out of 5 years?
That's just a guess. I
Yeah.
don't
We
know.
don't know that.
Oh, well, I can see that. Councillor Chairman?
So my question is, primarily, it's on one of your previous slides, you've got outlined the entrance to the premises. I think it was like maybe even one of your first slides. It had a red line just showing you where the entrance coming off Angel Road. Yeah, there we are. And what's already happening in this area is you've got bottlenecks occurring. And now I know this isn't directly in relation to but this is in relation to the increased footfall which is happening, and you've already got significant bottlenecks occurring on the entrance. The fact that this was shown, I presume makes it pertinent to discussion.
Just for clarification, we require every application to show a vehicular connection with the highway. So that's why there's a red line going around there.
Okay.
I mean, in theory, you can get to these two sites by any means across that blue land. We're not limiting. There are multiple ways of walking to it, and there are alternative. I mean, I guess that's a vehicular route through in the red line.
Yes. Yes.
Well, it was simply in relation to the fact that there's increasing buildings, because you're not going to have more students on the premises, there's I'm just concerned that it's going to create increasing traffic and congestion, and I'm just wondering if that was a consideration worth raising.
Well, we did consult the local highways officer that took that into consideration. We had 2 documents submitted that effectively travel plans that looked at the current methods that students and staff got to the site. That will help us inform how many extra scooter and cycle storage will be required. Because they didn't raise an objection based on additional traffic based on what is currently there, we can't really have that as a sort of concern. I sort of appreciate where they're coming from, and that was part of the reason we asked for the travel plan.
Thank you.
Any more questions, anyone? Councillor Bergman?
I would just like to hear the reasoning behind the 5 years and in relation to the future plans. I mean, it seems quite long, given that this should just be a temporary solution for something that clearly needs fixing.
About 10.
The statement submitted by the Academy outlines that they're trying to seek funding from the government to address the issue. So far, they haven't been able to do that, so they need the funding to create a more permanent solution. So we felt the 5 years was a length of time that would hopefully enable them to obtain that funding and draw up appropriate plans and get something in place. If they had said to us, we have funding and it will come to us in this, in a year and 2 years, then we could be more specific. But as Laura mentioned, they came to us and suggested 10, which felt too long for a temporary building. So that was sort of, I guess, a negotiation.
Can I ask, are these big enough to take the pupils in future years as well from the community?
What, in terms of the anticipated pupil numbers?
Yes.
We did consult, or we did talk to, sorry, 1 minute.
No, sorry, answer the question.
We did talk to County Council in terms of pupil numbers, and though they aren't a formal consultee on this application, because they did want to be, they were happy that it met the current need, and as a temporary proposition, that was acceptable. If it was a permanent building, then I think we would be looking into more depth about the long term.
I was just wondering about the long term, that you might have to have more of these modules on there, because you've got about 250 pupils extra to go on there, which you wouldn't have room for. So,
can I just come back on that point? I don't think this is the sole solution that they're looking at for accommodating the people from the school that's site was closed. I think they've also got an arrangement with St Clements to take some of the pupils on that site as well.
okay, it's different what I heard, but okay, never mind. Any other questions? Now we move on to the recommendation. The recommendation is to approve, and I will move that. And accepted by Councillor Sands. Discussion, Councillor Lovett.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs for this Evolution Academy Trust, but I'm sure they're not alone in having a school that is, with ceilings collapsing and not being able to teach the children in a reasonable school setting. Taking the children out to these mobiles is not an ideal situation, but with no funding and it not coming possibly for some years, we just have to accommodate, these modular buildings on the school playing fields, which isn't ideal. But knowing that the school does have adequate playing fields, I think we can accept that. The buildings themselves, green and some wood, painted green with some wood surround, I think hopefully will be a good replacement for the school. But it does draw one's attention to where do these children go when they have assembly or when they eat their lunch, and how do they, with some children actually at another school, the idea of coming together as a school is greatly affected by these temporary buildings. But that's all outside our control. And I'm quite 100% in agreement with allowing these temporary buildings for 5 years. And hopefully in 5 years' time we're not in the same position giving them another 5 years. But if we have to, we have to. But that's the sad state of affairs of sort of public essential buildings for children.
Councillor Chapman.
Like Councillor Sands, I've also worked in modular buildings like this, but I would just highlight for everyone that these are significantly better than possibly the historic ones we've worked in. I've worked in ones which felt like a shipping container, whereas these are fit for purpose. So we're not voting through something which is substandard. I think we can be confident that these are suitable for what they're being proposed to do. I'd also, it's commendable what the staff have done in that school and how they've treated it and how they're moving forward. I'm minded to support the application. Hopefully, as I said, hopefully in 5 years we'll have a different perspective on this and there'll be more funding. They can do something else. But I think I would be minded to encourage us all to vote in favour, I think.
Councillor Burlow?
Yeah, I think, we can see that it's a mess. It's kind of like, they've worked with modular buildings for 10 years, so there's clearly a lack of foresight planning and surveying of existing building, I think, on whatever account. I don't think that we can find a different short-term solution, but I really hope that lack of planning stops here and that they sort this out so we don't just have to add on additional modular buildings, as you say, with the years.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? No, we'll move on to the recommendation then. The recommendation is to approve. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. That's been approved. We'll move on to the next item now, which is being changed. It's now 4D.
Case officers on the way down.
Case officer on the way down. Which is on page 91, remember? Okay.
They're all very different. It's just very realistic. Yeah. No, that's fine. It's very different to where the situation is.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So I'm here with 301. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Ludwig, you need to sit in the public.
So you don't influence.
I know.
Okay, I'm here with 301 Untitled Road, which is a proposal for a 2-storey rear extension, single-storey rear and side extension, and the installation of a dormer window to the rear roof slope. Here you can see the site, which is located on the northwest side of Untitled Road, just past the junction with Common Road. And on the site plan here, you can see existing to the left here. There's a single-storey garage that's proposed to be demolished to facilitate the extension.
And here you can see the proposed site plan, which the single storey element is going to infill the section of the house here, and then you've got the 2-storey element against the side. Got the existing elevations here. You can see that the original form of the house has sort of largely been unaltered so far. And then these are the proposed elevations. So we've got the single-storey extension infilling the side here. The 2-storey element's going to extend 2.9 metres from the, 2.9 metres from the existing rear wall, and then the single-storey element will extend a further 2.45 metres beyond that. Materials are proposed to be red brick on the ground floor, and then white render to the rear, to the side, and then to this part of the rear elevation as well. Got the existing floor plans. So it's a 4-bedroom property with a sort of fairly standard residential layout. The proposal keeps it at 4 bedrooms upstairs, but is altering the layout to provide some additional facilities for the applicant. And then downstairs there's some additional rooms proposed, including bathroom facilities downstairs as well. Here we've got, so this is a view of the rear of number 301, so that's the subject property, just from adjacent the garage. The extension, the 2-storey extension will come in line with where you can see the adjacent extension at number 299. And it will extend just into some of this planting here, and obviously the garage is being demolished. There's a view towards number 303 here, which is largely obscured by the garage, which once again is going. And then this is a view to the other side, which is towards number 299. They have recently had permission to extend or change the rear extension here, so that that the layout of next door is subject to change. This is a view of just the inset part of the side elevation so that you can see the existing window layout. So that'll be infilled. And so, just so that you can get a scope of the space, this is towards the rear, so they've got substantial rear gardens on the site. And a view from the front. So the proposal isn't going to extend beyond this existing property line here. And you can see that there's some existing foliage and trees. This is a view towards number 301, so the subject site from inside the adjacent neighbour at number 303. This was taken from inside their kitchen. And so in the proposal terms, the proposed door would be there, and then the smaller window would be approximately here, with the extensions obviously going further out that way. And we've got the view from towards the rear of number 301 from the garden of 303 here. So once again, the proposal would extend to about here. I've also included the tree protection plan, just for reference. So there are some trees on the site. There's proposed ground protections in the front to protect the trees forwards of the property. Obviously there's no work, here we go. No works proposed forward of the property line. But and then where the garage is being demolished, that's all proposed to be hand dug, with the concrete base being demolished by hand. During development, root protection measures are to be put in place, and then foundations for the fittings are going to be hand dug as well. So that's what I've got for the presentation.
There have been some updates to the report since it was finalised, which should have been circulated. So during the reconsultation period, 3 extra letters of objection were received following the report being finalised. So I'll just take you through some of the issues that were raised. So if I take you back to the there we go. Okay, so the first letter was from a nearby neighbour who objected to the height and the scale of the revised scheme, which is the 2-storey extension, and the dormer window, which is you can see here, stating it's not in character with the neighbouring properties. They also objected to the proposed materials, stating that the rendered brickwork is inferior in quality and appearance to the original building, and also to the surrounding properties. They also, concerns were also raised in a separate letter that the 2-storey element would have a detrimental impact to the residents of number 303 on their enjoyment of the property due to loss of privacy into their living room, kitchen and garden. And there was also concerns that the 2-storey extension is out of keeping with the conservation area. Another letter, final letter, was received from a consultant on behalf of the neighbours, which raised some more concerns that the revised scheme would set an unwanted or dangerous precedent in this part of the conservation area. I think it should be noted that each planning application that we receive is assessed on its own merit, so the approval of one scheme wouldn't necessarily guarantee or dictate the outcome of another in that area. The consultant also raised concerns that the 2nd-storey aspect of the proposal and the dormer window are incongruous with the building and not in keeping with the character of the area. There was also concern that the scale and massing of the extensions would harm the building as locally listed heritage asset and the conservation area. Further concerns were raised regarding materials, including the visual impact of the render at the first floor, sort of increasing the impact of the massing for the neighbours at number 303. There was concern that the proposal doesn't appropriately preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area, and that once again the use of the render and the 2nd-storey sort of wasn't cohesive with the character of the building itself or the wider area. There were also concerns with amenity with regards to number 303. The consultant raised concerns that there would be harm by way of loss of outlook, which was further amplified by the render. The ground floor side windows, so here, causing a loss of privacy over the existing boundary treatments by way of overlooking, and that the rear window here would cause a loss of privacy by overlooking to the rear gardens. It was also raised by the consultant that the nature of the applicant's disability shouldn't be weighed in terms of the decision-making process. I think it's worth noting, I've added in the updates report, that obviously we have a duty to assess the impact on equality and diversity for each application, but in this instance the acceptability of the proposal hasn't been weighed or based on the medical needs of the applicant, and the merits of the application have been considered in their own right. There was also a statement made in response to the planning statement which was submitted with the application, which references an existing two-storey rear extension, at number 297, which is a building that is included in the local list grouping, which includes number 301. The consultant acting on behalf of the neighbours stated that that extension didn't gain planning permission, but it's worth making it clear that planning permission was granted for that extension in 1998. So yeah, just to clarify that.
Thanks. I also just wanted to pick up another point that's made of the letter received from consultants acting on behalf of one of the objectors. In that letter, the representation asks the application is withdrawn from consideration of this committee and is subject to, quoting from the letter, a proper appraisal of the implications of this application by the conservation team. The consultant then suggests that failure to do so will result in an application for judicial review by the objectors. The representation also suggests that other objections by the consultant's clients have not been addressed and should not be dealt with via an update to the agenda. Taking the latter point first, Danny's gone through in quite a lot of detail the additional comments received, and notwithstanding that they were made after the publication of the report, I think the issues that have been raised are addressed in the report and included in our assessment of the proposals. There's a representation, there's an inclusion in the representation about our duty as a council under the Planning and Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 to have regard to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character of the conservation area. My reading of the representation excuse me, is that there's an implication that that is a duty placed upon the conservation team. That's not the case. The duty is placed upon the council to have regard in the decision-making process. And our advice to you as a planning applications committee is that we have given with regard to that duty. It's referred to specifically in the report that's in front of you. You can make a decision as to whether or not you think we've got the assessment right, and you can come to a different conclusion based on the information in front of you, but we have had regard to the impact of the proposals, not only upon the conservation area, but also upon the character of the local listed building. So, from the officer's point of view, there's no reason not to proceed to consider and determine the application before you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have got some speakers. We've got one which is going to be read out by John Cullen. I think that's from Margaret Smith.
And Mr. Cullen also wants to speak
Yes.
on behalf, so he's got 3 minutes for each.
3 minutes for each.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Committee, for giving me a few minutes of your time. My wife and I live next door to number 301 in 303, where we've lived for 25 years and raised our family in the house. I did want to come and ask you not to make a decision today because we felt that the original report that was included in the committee papers, as the officers have explained, it was prepared on the 25th of August before a number of significant objections were submitted within the consultation period, and it includes the recommendation to approve the application when we feel that those later objections, which were properly submitted, have not been taken into account in making that recommendation, and the brief update that you've had, I think you received it yesterday afternoon in paper form, and you've had it printed today, doesn't do justice to the objections that were raised. I mean, for example, our own objection was 2 substantial documents, a letter and a short report from the planning advisor. And as I said, I don't think they've been given sufficient attention and consideration in advising you today, which is why we felt that the most sensible way forward would be to defer consideration of the application, ask for a full report taking account of all the objections received within the consultation, and consider it at a future meeting. So, however, if you are minded to make a decision on the application today, my wife and I would like to make you aware of our main objections. And we don't think these have been published on the public access website, so they haven't been made publicly available. The case officer has referred to the precedent of 297 Unthank Road, where there is a two-storey extension in place in the same group of buildings. That planning permission was granted, although the case isn't shown on the public access website. The permission was granted in 1998, more than 15 years before the adoption of the current planning policies. So current planning policies, as you are well aware, have been in place for 7 or 8 years now in Norwich, and there's a different framework in place and different criteria applied to any approvals made now. So a 1998 permission does not amount to a precedent. Moreover, we do think that if you give permission to this development today, it does set a precedent for future decisions. You're required as the council, as I understand it, to be consistent in your decision making. So there is a likelihood that future applications of a similar kind in the same area will have to be considered for approval because of making this one decision today. For that reason, we think that there is a kind of a risk of further deterioration in the conservation area, the character of the area. It's not the case that in the immediate vicinity we have a lot of buildings with, for example, white render treatment on the upper stories. That's not the case, although it's referred to in the application and in the officer's report that that is not uncommon down the road, but in the immediate area it's not at all the case. Similarly with dormer windows, the immediate buildings in this area do not have dormer windows in them, although there are dormer windows on these buildings. Unthank Road is a very long road. The immediate area does not have those features.
Can I stop you there, because you had 3 minutes and a bit, and you're speaking for someone. Are you just carrying on for you now?
I'm not. I've done my 3 minutes and so
okay.
into the second 3 minutes.
So you're into the second 3 minutes.
Yeah, so
brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. I should
take
make
my
that
time,
clear.
sorry.
Should make that clear. So our submissions, when in the consultation period, also include a number of suggestions for compromise, such as the use of different materials, the reduction of the height from 2-storey extension to 1-storey extension, the mitigation of our concerns about privacy by using glass and some of the windows which would be obscured and so on. I don't think these suggestions have been communicated to you or picked up by the case officer in the updated report, but that's another reason we feel why it would be better if this application were reconsidered at a later meeting and a decision made, say in a month's time when you meet again. We are concerned that this application, and I think that illustration that's on the screen at the moment shows well, there would be a very substantial extension of at full height of the building over the back of the main living areas, overlooking the back of the main living areas of our house. Even at first floor level, an additional large window, again, looking straight into the main living areas of our house. And we just feel that it's not appropriate and it shouldn't be granted approval. So thank you, Chair. And,
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Committee, for your time.
We have 2 more speakers. First one is Councillor Lubbock. And you have 3 minutes as well, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I speak as Ward Councillor for Eton and on behalf of the residents of 303 Unthank Road, immediate neighbours to 301 and those most affected by the proposed development. The property at 301 is locally listed and is in a conservation area. the attributes of both making it and the other properties in this location particularly attractive and in need of protection. Otherwise, what's the point of these designations? The original proposal for a two-storey side and rear extension has been revised and reduced following the objections and negotiations with the planning officer, and the amended scheme has reduced the size, scale and massing of the proposal. However, the residents of 303 maintain that the principle of the two-storey aspect of the revised scheme will infringe on the enjoyment of their property and adversely affect the character of the conservation area. The loss of privacy and overlooking will remain, although to a lesser extent. The two-storey element retains a rear window which will overlook the garden of 303 and other neighbours, leading to a loss of privacy and overlooking. The single-storey element includes two side windows that will be considerably closer to the boundary between the properties than the existing ground floor windows currently are. These new windows will overlook the existing 1.8 metre fence between the properties, providing a view through to the living room and kitchen breakfast room, presenting a significant erosion of indoor privacy, and this could be addressed by conditioning obscured glass to these windows. The allowing of white render as building materials rather than conditioning the red brick which exists does not strike me as adequately preserving the conservation area. Render is an inappropriate material, not in keeping with the other locally listed properties in the conservation area. Whilst the area to be rendered has been reduced in size, why allow it at all in this special setting of locally listed Edwardian properties of red brick? Finally, addressing the issue that both David Parkin spoke of and also the previous speaker, of the report being written before the deadline of the revised scheme had been reached, and the perception that objections to that revised scheme were not taken into account in the officer's decision in that written report. I hope that as part of our remit as a planning committee, we have a duty of care, and we are concerned that both applicants and objectors receive a good and fair experience of the planning process, and that it is seen to be open and transparent. On this occasion, the objectors were not told in an appropriate time that there would be a verbal update to the committee taking into account their objections. This has led to anxiety and the appearance of objections not being taken into account. And so I hope in future this can be made clear when further consultation is expected to overrun a date of the written report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did the applicant want to speak?
Yes, he does.
Yeah?
He's got 6 minutes, Chair.
Yeah, Steve? And you have 6 minutes.
Thank you.
If you need them.
I'll speak quickly. Well, we first viewed the house in 2021 and we felt it's where we wanted to be. Maggie previously lived around the corner, my wife, from Bank Road for many years with a late husband, and moved to Point London when we moved in together, as this was where I lived with my late wife and our youngest, who was still at middle school, and moving to her to the city would have been inappropriate at that time. Maggie's always wanted to return to the city to gain her freedom and autonomy as much as possible given her disability. A visual impairment means she was reliant on public transport or being chauffeured around by myself if she needed to visit Norwich. Being in walking distance of the city allowed Maggie to enjoy a degree of freedom and independence once more. The house has been subject to a fire and was in need of work both inside and out, and this hasn't put us off, and we viewed it many times over a number of weeks and put in an offer that was accepted by the owners. We then have many months to wait until we can move in with constant fear that we might lose this house. The location is perfect for her to have the freedom that she has previously enjoyed, and we also felt that we would be able to adapt the property to meet Maggie's needs and future-proof her house for further declines in her health. The property is currently not suitable for large multi-family living. Bathroom, toilet and kitchen facilities are some way short of what we expect, and are made even more challenging by Maggie's disabilities. And having researched what other properties have done in the area, we felt extending the property to accommodate our needs was something that could be achieved, or possible. This is an important factor in our decision to purchase the property. Having looked at the set of 6 identical houses, of which ours is one, all have either single-storey or double-storey extensions, giving more confidence that extending will be acceptable. It has never been our intention to build something out of character or that would heavily impact on the lives of our neighbours. When our original planning drawing were met with some objections, we were obviously concerned and set about putting together a revised scheme that would alleviate these. We scaled back the first floor to take the concerns into account, and it is now very reflective of a similar first floor extension of the property next door to one. The ground floor is largely unchanged from the original scheme in terms of area. It is similar to the extensions of all the properties in 5 houses on either side of the house. And much of the scheme is designed to accommodate Maggie's disabilities. A little more detail may help to see the importance of some aspects of the scheme. She's registered blind and has no hearing in one ear. She suffers Meniere's disease, which is a serious balance condition which can on occasions result in a drop vertigo attack. She has chronic pain conditions as a result of an accident, which means she has to adapt the way she does things, and this can often be in conflict with her other environment. She also has reactive hypoglycemia, meaning she has to be very careful with what she eats and needs support with shopping and cooking. Therefore, we need to provide some ensuite facility upstairs to allow Maggie to visit the toilet safely at night. This means losing a bedroom, and as a family of 6, it is essential that we have an additional room. We need a downstairs bathroom in case Maggie's balance issues mean she cannot get upstairs. And in addition, the downstairs room should be converted to downstairs room now and in the future. This room will also be used when Maggie needs a carer to stay over in the house or when the house is full of kids. Increasing kitchen size will allow more light and the possible need to have raised surfaces, especially in this area, is space for Maggie has assistance with food preparation. Concerns were also raised about the impact that the extension may have on trees. We engaged a tree specialist tree consultant report, and their report has been submitted with our application. Make some recommendations for protected trees, which means expected follow. We will not remove any trees to the extension and have not removed trees to the extension. The garden will be neglected, so trees are in need of pruning and in a couple of cases removing. This work was carried out under consented planning permission by a qualified, competent tree specialist, and a number of saplings have been planted since to replace them. A batting notice survey has been carried out with no observed entering or leaving the new space. The report has been submitted with information. The ecologist felt there will be no long-term impact on the ecology of the area. We've installed a number of water cuts and solar waste recovery surface. We were aware that there may be some issues with shadowing and light to neighbouring properties, so consultants were engaged to carry out a daylight sunlight survey. The results of the survey were factored into the redesign to ensure we have little or no impact. Again, this report was included with our submission. Given the rear garden is some 60 metres in length, there is still ample outdoor space for us. Further improved by the intended remove of the asbestos-free garage and associated concrete slab. A great deal of materials found in the garden have already been recycled and put to alternative uses. For example, over 100 slabs have been reused, an old shed has been repurposed as a wood store, the old greenhouse, which is in the garden, is now full of tomatoes and chilies, and the chippings of a tree that had been felled by the previous owner has been used as mulch along the borders. We're keen that property frontage is kept in character with neighbouring properties, and that is in fact known. Finishes are to be kept to those typical of the area. We've already engaged a local sash window specialist to refurbish existing windows where possible, or replace those beyond repair without entering into the units. The stained glass, the front door and hallway have been damaged and lost, and we've replaced these with stained glass and put the door back to its original branding Edwardian condition. And finally, we engaged a planning consultant to advise and steer us with regard to local planning policy, and hopefully we'll all come together into something meaningful. The revised scheme brings the property up to modern living standards for a large family. On a 6 semi-detached property built in the early 1900s, it's the only one that's not been extended in some way. We've worked with the planning officer to resubmit the scheme and tries to accommodate those concerns. I've mitigated for light, tree, and environmental issues whilst developing the scheme to allow us to enjoy a home renovated for modern family living and accommodate my wife's disabilities.
Thank you very much for that. Did the officers want to come back with any questions and comments which were made by the representations? No?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Can I just, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, on the point that the objector made about the process and the lack of transparency, I mean, you didn't communicate clearly enough with them that their representations will be reported to the committee. I apologise for that, and I'll make sure that going forward if we get into such a, if something similar happens, that we do make it clear to those who are being consulted that their representations will be reported to the committee. So I don't want to give the impression that we're not going to do that, because we obviously do. And we didn't communicate that as clearly as we should have done in this instance. Moving on to the kind of planning related points, there's two things that I just want to make clear. First of all, there's this issue of precedent. I think we're not suggesting that the fact that 297 has a two-storey extension justifies a two-storey extension at this property. In the same way that the fact that if permission is granted for an extension at this property, it won't justify a two-storey extension on any other property. There's nowhere in planning that says you can't extend your house. It's whether or not that extension is acceptable. So it's a case-by-case basis, dependent upon the design of the individual extension, the location and orientation of properties concerned, and in relation to their neighbours. So the matter of precedent isn't one that we need to consider. With respect to the points that the applicant has just made about his wife's disabilities, with every sympathy for those points, those are not something that should bear upon your decision making in this instance. You need to determine the application on an assessment of against policies. In personal circumstances are capable of being a material planning consideration, but in this instance they don't bear on the acceptability or otherwise of the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We've got the questions now, and I've got one or two. Can I think the first one's been answered about the shed in the back garden. Is that going to be recycled and used, the brickwork and stuff?
Sorry, the garage.
The garage.
It's proposed to be demolished. It's not.
Okay, because I understand he was saying he's already used a lot of recycling in the other buildings he's took down and stuff.
There is asbestos in the garage, so that obviously that will have to be removed by a specialist. So I don't know what materials could be recycled afterwards.
Okay.
But that hasn't sort of been part of the assessment.
Well, the second question is about the glaze. Have you looked at to have glazed windows?
Obscure glaze.
So obscure glazing for the two, so that would be for this window here.
Yeah.
In my assessment, I didn't consider it necessary. It's something that we could consider or we could condition. If I take you to the floor plans, the smaller window services a utility room, so there wouldn't particularly, it's not going to be a high activity area. So I wouldn't consider that the impact of overlooking would be sort of considerable. With regards to the larger window, it's something we could consider. My assessment was that there is about 1.7 metres to the boundary, where there is shrubbery on both sides. There's a wall at that point, the fencing becomes a wall. But that would, in my assessment, obscure most of the glazing in terms of the boundary treatment. It could be considered to obscure glaze. That's something that we can condition. In my assessment, I didn't think that it was necessary. But
Okay, and my other question is about the rendering, the white rendering on the wall. Is that being done to make it cheaper to build by using breeze blocks underneath, and not red brick to make it into the same material as what the other houses are? Is there a reason why they're putting rendering on and not having brick?
It's not for us to consider what the reason for the materials is, really. In this case, we considered that on the first floor and being hidden from view from the vast majority of the conservation area, it's acceptable in this particular instance on that particular part of the building. but we haven't been provided with a reason as to why it's been.
So what did we think that was acceptable to have rendered instead of red brick?
So in my assessment, the render is being kept to the first floor. It's not going to be highly visible from the wider area. It will be the red brick to the ground floor ensures that red brick is still the predominant material across the side and rear elevations.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Berger?
You'll have to help me a little bit here because I'm not entirely clear. So we've heard a lot about 303. We haven't really heard much about 299 and how it will impact that property. I think you mentioned that there is planning permission for 299. I'd just like to understand where the two proposed extensions will end up with each other. Because at the moment, I'm guessing that's not what's going to be there after the extension. But at the moment, obviously, there's like an awkward two-storey extension which kind of overlaps with I'm guessing, a window. And I'd just like to understand a little bit more the relationship to 299.
Of course, so my assessment has to be on what's there now, because although they've been granted planning permission, they might decide not to build. So the proposed two-storey extension will come in line with the existing single-storey. So,
is that the one on the very right or the one in the middle? What's the existing single-storey you're talking about?
The existing single-storey,
Okay.
the line of that is here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously the single-storey element will extend, 2.4 metres beyond that.
Okay.
The daylight and sunlight assessment covered this in the report, but the daylight and sunlight assessment, which was provided along with the revised scheme by the applicant, does confirm that in line with the BRE guidelines, the 45-degree rule in terms of overshadowing, the shadow wouldn't come over the centre point of the adjacent windows, and therefore would be considered acceptable. There will be some level of overshadowing, but it wouldn't be considered to cause sort of an unacceptable level of harm. Also, as the properties are orientated sort of north, the rear of the garden is northwest facing. The main impact would be sort of much later in the day. So, my consideration wasn't that the level of overshadowing was a significant harm.
Councillor Chapman?
My question is primarily based on ignorance in relation to David's comments about not taking into account the reason for the extension, which was the disability of the resident. Why is this not? I don't quite understand why this isn't a consideration if that's the purpose of the reason behind the entire thing.
So, personal circumstances such as disabilities can influence planning decisions. They have the ability to do so. David's point there was that in this case we consider that the proposals are acceptable regardless of that fact. So we are not affording weight to the disability in our assessment of the planning application. And therefore the need or otherwise of the proposals for that disability are not something that we are trying to convince you that we're not trying to be convinced that they are necessarily required for that purpose. We are simply deciding the application on its merits regardless of that fact.
That's a really reassuring answer. I thought we had institution labellers long ago there, so thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, is there any more questions?
Sorry, can I just come back on that? I think one of the things that the objectors referred to is that we have a section in all our committee reports which reflects our duty under the Equalities Act, going to describe what the impact on people with relevant characteristics actually is. So because the applicant here has a disability, we're required to, under exercising that duty, to tell you kind of what the nature of that disability and how it might affect them. But we're not saying in this instance that if that disability didn't exist, sorry, but what we're essentially saying in this instance is that even if that disability didn't exist, we would find this application.
Okay, we'll move on to the recommendation. The recommendation is to approve, and I'll move that. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Sands. Discussion, anyone? No, we'll move. Councillor Sands?
I was only going to comment that the front elevation, which is the primary consideration for the conservation area, remains unchanged. The proposed extension doesn't impinge on the street scene in any way, so I think that overall the proposed development is quite acceptable.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is another one that's quite finely balanced, I think, because the introduction of two-storey extensions along this stretch is it's unusual, and there is certainly going to be some overlooking from the top window at the back. I believe there isn't one currently, so that the new window at the back will create some overlooking that wasn't in the original design. I have some real sympathy with those that are objecting to this, but on balance, this is one that I will be voting in favour for.
Okay, it's my problem is with the upstairs window about an exclude glass. Is there any way we can make a condition that they put the glass in, or would that be acceptable?
I think it was the downstairs window, and it's only the upper part of the only the upper part of the window that would need to be obscured.
Is that correct?
Well, it depends on. So sorry, are you
Well, they were complaining about you overlooking into their property.
So they're overlooking into the property could only be possible from the ground floor windows, the rear, the top floor rear window extends beyond.
Okay.
It wouldn't be possible with angles for there to be overlooking into the property. The concerns raised in the letters of objection for the top floor window were purely for loss of privacy to the garden.
Okay. Councillor Stewart?
Yes, thank you. I think there is an opportunity here to provide some mitigation for those at number 303 by requiring obscured glass on those two ground floor levels. They could actually, there's quite a big window they're proposing there on the left, or the rear section. They could actually do something quite nice with it. So therefore, I would like to propose some kind of obscuring.
Okay, I'll second that. Any discussion, Councillor Graham, on that subject?
I'm not too sure about that. I'm not sure. I think I missed what purposes that upstairs window, the room with the upstairs window concerned.
No, we're talking about the downstairs ones.
Okay. But in terms of reasonable adjustments, I'm a bit concerned about asking somebody with a serious visual impairment and balance problem to deal with obscured glass. It's quite a big ask. So I'm wondering if there's another way around it. Possibly the window could be a bit smaller, or they could, or could have blinds.
David, do you want to come in here and all the hands have gone up there?
I think the side window that we're talking about is, well, I was going to say the one on the side. But could you point it out, please? I think it's that one. So it's a room to, it's a window to quite a large space, which has large windows at ground floor looking down into the back garden. Could you just point those out, please, then?
The bifold doors on the rear elevation.
Thank you. So, in terms of the point that you're making, Councillor Graham, it wouldn't necessarily impact significantly upon light levels in that space, because the majority of the light comes in from those bifold doors. So if members were concerned and wanted to offer some mitigation to the residents in the adjacent property, I think obscure glazing, the anything over the top 0.8 metres or something like that. Anything over 1.7 metres would effectively mean that if there is a chance of being able to overlook the boundary treatment, obscuring above that level will actually reduce that. So you still have clear glazing on the bottom of most of that, certainly that larger window.
Okay, any other discussion on that?
You too.
Councillor Bergline?
I'd just like to say that I think that creates a good compromise, and it means that we're taking both sides into account.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? We'll take a vote on that. All those in favour of the recommendation for the stained glass or what it is?
Obscured glass. On the upper part of the window.
Yeah.
Clarity is obscured
Yeah.
glazing at the top part of the window, above 1.7 metres.
All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to the recommendation now. Did anyone else want to speak on the whole plan now? Move on. Recommendation is to approve. It's been seconded with the condition. All those in favour, please show.
We've got some people not voting, so it is a recorded vote. Councillor Driver, Councillor Sands, Councillor Bergline, Councillor Champion, Councillor Stukely, Councillor Peake, Councillors Young, Graham and Sands.
All those against? Abstentions? Thank you.
Councillor Davis is abstaining.
So that's been approved with the glass. Thank you. Just wait for Stephen. Oh, he's here. Oh. Yes. Thank you all for turning up. We need to get Councillor Lovick back in. Oh no, we don't. Yeah, she's out all the time on this one, isn't she?
Yes.
Okay. We're on 4C now, which is 406 Unbank Road. And on page 69, and Steve, you'd like to take us through the report?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon everyone. This is the application 406 Unbank Road. First of all, just try and set the scene by explaining how the site is arranged, because it's somewhat unusual. I'll use this one, this one's clearer. If you look at the screen, you'll see to the front it's fairly regular and typical of the arrangement on this side of Unbank Road, with a front garden area and a normal section of rear garden. Beyond the normal section of rear garden, at the very bottom of the garden is kind of an extra bit that the property has somehow acquired at one time in the past. And then also the slightly the more unusual part is this sliver of the site that turns the corner and eventually reaches Judge's Walk. So in terms of the area of the sites that we're looking at, it's primarily the rear section of the garden and this sliver leading us to Judge's Walk. It's useful just to note, whilst we're still here, that outside of this site there's a pretty regular grain of development, with the houses on Unbank Road fronting Unbank Road with fairly long and narrow gardens, and a similar situation on Judge's Walk.
Can I just stop this? Should Lovick allowed in here or not?
Councillor Lovick is allowed to be in here. She sits in the public gallery speaking, but we have no speakers. Unless she wants to speak. You want to speak? So.
Okay. Do we need to start again?
No.
Okay.
Councillor Lovick will not be determining this application, so it doesn't need to be here for the entire item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that just sets the scene in terms of an explanation of how the site is arranged. Moving on to, this actually in terms of the block plan bid, this shows that in more detail. So what we're actually looking at is the rear section of the site, where currently there is a somewhat decrepit air raid shelter located within this park. There's also a small outbuilding within the corner, and an existing timber garage and carport kind of structure within this section. Effectively, in terms of how the site operates at the moment, this rear section is out of action because the applicants have young children and obviously an air raid shelter, and of course the repair is somewhat dangerous to play around and so on. And this just shows a bit more detail in terms of how this part of the site is arranged. You'll note also on this plan you can see that there is mature planting in the form of a couple of tall mature trees along the boundary of this site. And this plan shows the proposed layout. So what we're looking at is a single-storey outbuilding that would replace the demolished air raid shelter and existing outbuilding. The outbuilding would be used by the occupants of the property as ancillary living accommodation. It's not set up in terms of plans we've got for any relatives or anyone to live in, so it's not a granny annex in the way that we might typically see annexes or outbuildings at Bottom Gardens. It's very much to be used for as an office space, as an additional leisure space that frees up space within the main house. Just further to that. So this will show the relationship. So this is the view. The built part, the outbuilding, is the bit with solid walls, and there's also an outside kind of terrace area. So this whole portion of the site, broadly or largely speaking, would be developed upon, and there would then be a route through to the side passageway where the garage would be located. And this plan indicates, or shows us rather, the proposed, this shows the, this shows the proposed replacement garage. So it's very much a like-for-like replacement. It would be slightly taller, which is indicated by the dashed blue lines. These plans show the outbuilding in its elevation form. You'll note that the red bubbles indicate where some tweaks have been made. I'll explain those in some detail in a moment. So this is the view from number 19, Judges Walk, without the existing boundary treatment in situ. And this is the view looking towards 19 Judges Walk. The outbuilding has been designed with a sloping roof so that it's no taller than 2.4 metres where it's closest to Judges Walk, 19 Judges Walk, rising to a maximum height of 3.6 metres at the other side. This is showing these same views in a bit more detail. And these are side elevations with 406 in the background and showing the access to the side passageway on this part of the outbuilding. So this is a similar view, but this time this is showing a fence in situ that marks the boundary of number 19 Judges Walk. So just to go through the photographs, this is showing the front view of the main dwelling. This is the main section of rear garden with the application site being beyond the garden shed that you can see there. This is the garden again looking back up towards the main house. And then this is the area that we're really focused on, so buried under this scrubby growth is the air raid shelter. This is it again, slightly more close-up view. This is the existing outbuilding that will be demolished and replaced with a similar sized structure. And then this is the side passageway that runs between the properties on Judges Walk leading to the existing garage. This is the existing garage. And the carport beyond with Judges Walk just beyond. And then this is the view from Judges Walk showing you the access that exists to the site from Judges Walk. In terms of our assessment, we are happy with the design of the outbuilding. It's relatively low impact. We feel it reflects the characteristics of the site well. And then materially and scale-wise, we acknowledge that it's somewhat unusual, but given the unusual arrangement of the site and the situation, we don't think that it's particularly harmful in terms of its impact on the character of the site or of the conservation area that it's included within. In terms of the focus of some of our assessment, we have received objections from the occupants of number 19, which is the property that you can see here. The objections are primarily focused on the proximity of the proposed outbuilding to their rear boundary. Those concerns, again, in more detail, are focused on the change in the outlook that they would experience and the potential for disturbances to be caused by noise from the use of the outbuilding. This sets the scene from their side of the boundary, so this is the rear garden of 19 Judges Walk looking across towards the application site. This is a similar view but looking slightly the other way. This is the boundary treatment up close, and the next couple of photos will show the same view but from the first floor bedrooms. This is a useful photograph in particular because in terms of the view that would be created following the development, you would see the outbuilding pretty close to the boundary, but the applicants have actually proposed to use a green roof. So the idea is that the majority of this view where there would be a building in the future potentially would be of hopefully a pleasant green roof that would fit in with the verdant character at this end of the site. And we have recommended on that basis that, or we suggest, we would add a condition rather requiring the details of that green roof to be submitted to improve plans for construction. That is primarily being done so that we would make sure that it's of a suitable standard, and so on, because the applicants aren't in a position yet to have made the decisions of exactly what they would use. That's a similar view again from another window on the first floor. This is the view from the opposite side of the boundary fence that we were looking at a moment ago. The applicants are planning to retain a section, a strip as a buffer, as it were, between the boundaries, so it wouldn't be pressed directly up against the neighbouring boundary. That's just another view. If I just return to the plans, then I can explain one of the other key parts. So this view is the view from the rear of number 19 looking towards the outbuilding. This shows the existing fence in situ with the proposed outbuilding. So in terms of the view that would be possible or that would be created should it be constructed from number 19, it would be predominantly of the roof slope, which would be sloping away, rising gently with, and it would be topped with a green ceiling roof. So in terms of the outlook, we acknowledge that it would result in noticeable changes to the current situation. However, we don't consider that the outlook would be harmed in such a way that it would be particularly detrimental to the residential community of the occupants of number 19, and indeed the use of a green roof would be somewhat softer than using tiles or some other form of roofing material. The occupants of number 19 would continue to benefit from a good level of amenity in terms of their outlook. They're largely the view that they currently experience would remain unchanged. It would just be this strip that projects beyond the boundary fence that would be visible. The other key thing that they've made reference to in terms of concerns would be noise that would emanate from the use of the outbuilding. This was discussed with the applicants during the determination of the application, and a couple of tweaks were made to the design. And just to show you, so in particular, there's a gym proposed in this corner of the outbuilding and a snug room in this corner. So there was concern that these two windows, which were originally openable, noise could emanate from these rooms and cause disturbance. So the applicant, more so in an effort to be considerate to the neighbours' concern rather than something that we specifically required, have modified the design so these windows are non-openable. So we would have a condition that would require that they would remain non-openable and be constructed as such. And the other minor tweak to allow that is the installation of an additional window on this elevation to allow for ventilation. So we appreciate those tweaks because they are helpful in terms of reducing any potential impact. And in terms of overall assessment of the noise that could emanate from this site, we would note that there are numerous uses or developments that could take place within this part of the garden that would have a similar level of impact, such as a smaller outbuilding, a shed or play equipment, or even a swimming pool perhaps. So we don't consider that noise emanating from the proposed outbuilding is something that we would be able to refuse the application on, or indeed be considered to be significantly harmful. Other key considerations relate to the use of the outbuilding, and in terms of the use, we've explained that it would be ancillary office or living accommodation to the main dwelling. There's obviously the access that exists to the side, so we would add a condition, should this be approved, requiring that the outbuilding remains as ancillary accommodation, couldn't be let or indeed sold as a separate unit of accommodation. There are some concerns with regard to the presence of the large and mature trees. We've received an arboricultural impact assessment that so far is satisfactory. Our tree protection officer has recommended that we add another condition that requires arboricultural supervision during the construction phase to make sure that there aren't any issues with the root protection area as the trees are quite close. So that's something that we would also add. I think that just about covers all of the key parts. So in summary, we consider this to not be causing any significant harm to the character and heritage of the site or the surrounding conservation area. We acknowledge that it represents a notable change to the current situation for the neighbours. However, we don't consider there are significant issues in terms of impacting on neighbouring residential amenities. Therefore, recommended with the conditions that this is approved.
Thank you for that, Steve. We just got the one speaker, Councillor Lovick. You said you want to speak.
Well, the reason why I stayed, I was interested in the presentation and such like. The reason I brought it to committee was the size of the ancillary development in the garden, and I wanted to see what people felt about it, and I didn't want to particularly at this point object to it, but I just wanted it to be decided by the committee, this sizable development in the garden for conservation area.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Davis.
So now you said this can only be used as ancillary accommodation or office space and can't be rented out. Does that include not being able to be rented out as an Airbnb?
We typically apply a standard condition that doesn't specify use as an Airbnb. I'm not.
It wouldn't. Use as an Airbnb can take place without a change of use, so it's not automatically development. So our standard condition wouldn't cover
that. Councillor Sands.
With the long slither of land extending down to Judges Walk, I'm guessing that the existing garage and carpet will be demolished to give access to the site for construction work, and then was it a new garage being constructed there, which, looking at the photograph, can only improve the appearance from Judges Walk in any case. Is that correct?
I don't know about the construction of the site. It would be possible to use access from Untitled Road. There's space inside of the dwelling to get through there. But
There is? Oh, I didn't realise.
there is, but they potentially. I mean, I'd probably suggest it's not that favourable, because I think in one of the photos you can see that it is rather tight down there, and the garage that would be rebuilt is intended to be used for the storage of cycles and such like, so you've got easy access to get in and out from Judges Walk rather than traipsing the whole way to the other end onto Untitled Road. So the construction methods and so on haven't been considered as part of this application, so I couldn't say one way or another in terms of your question.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I will the recommendation, and the recommendation is to approve. I've got second. Councillor Sands. Discussion, Councillor Davis?
Just
Oh, okay. Any discussion? Councillor Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. I think actually it was right to bring this in for us to have a look at, because it is rather large, and you can see why those at number 19 Judges Walk elsewhere have concerns about this. And their outlook will be changed by it, whereas I think the fact that it's going to have green roof will mitigate that and limit that, the effect of that considerably. And I think since I've been on planning, this is only the second application I've seen, second domestic application that has a green roof, so I'm impressed to see it. I'll be voting for.
Anyone else? No? All those in favour of the recommendation, which is to approve, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much.
I'll get Councillor Young.
Okay, there's just one other item
Councillor Young needs to
on the agenda. Councillor Young needs to disappear, I'm afraid. Thank you. Always amused me why we had to keep that secret, because it's written down, she's already read it.
You're not
Yeah, I know, yeah, David.
Yeah, thank you. Item 5, there's no report, so it pretty much says what it says in the agenda papers. Members will remember that, some members will remember that we received a pre-act presentation on this proposal some time back. The UEA has indicated to us that from given the importance of the project to them and the future of the Lansdowne Wall, they will experience difficulties if they don't get a decision one way or another by the end of this month. So they have asked us to ask you to hold an extraordinary meeting on Thursday the 29th of September to allow the forward building application for the refurbishment and repair of the teaching wall to be considered. So,
Okay, I can't see any reason why we can't have an extraordinary meeting unless anyone's got any problems with that.
Can we just check there aren't any other committee meetings?
There ain't.
At the same time?
we do check that.
Yeah, we'll check that.
4 PM there's a Teams meeting.
Aha.
Inquiries, council inquiries services.
Or
shall we finish with them?
Well, I hope so.
I hope so. In my diary.
Yeah, just to remind members, there was a previous resolution to have a site visit, so the proposal is to hold a site visit on site at 9:30 and then to come back here for 11 to hear the item.
But to meet here first, because it's easy to get from here.
Well, those who want to make their own way there can.
Okay.
But if anybody wants, we will.
You'll regret this, Jackie.
You will. That's the reason you said all meet here, or do you remember you saying
Car
it?
parking is limited, but I was told, and one of your political assistants came and saw me afterwards, a lot of people like to cycle, but I wouldn't recommend taking the bus because I don't think you'd be guaranteed to be back by 11. It should be
What are you saying, our bus system's no good?
I may excuse myself from the site visit because I've seen the inside of the...
The site visit is not compulsory.
As to where we'll meet, we'll sort that out nearer the time. I mean...
Well, we met last time on that E-shot, was with the Greens.
Yes, probably on Chancellor's Green.
Yeah, Chancellor's Green.
At the top end of the teaching wall, but there are other options, but we'll confirm that nearer to the time.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of the meeting.